Good evening, good evening, good evening, everybody. Welcome to a special episode of The Levine Show. Here we are, 6 p.m. Mountain, 8 p.m. Eastern. And why? It's because we're reviewing the CBC Fifth Estate episode titled Conspiracy in Coutts. So, right off the bat, with its title, you can tell that we're not going to be pleased with this because what conspiracy are they talking about? Pretty sure they're not talking about the Crown's conspiracy where they worked with the RCMP in order to set things up and exaggerate and create a narrative that scared Canada all the way to the invocation of the EA. I'm pretty sure that's not the conspiracy they're talking about. They must be doubling down on their conspiracy that they created, in addition with that other two groups there that we saw, against the men. And what's that conspiracy? I'm suspecting, because I haven't seen it yet, I've heard a lot about it, seen quite a few clips, but this will be my first time going through it. But what conspiracy? Likely the one that the jury said that doesn't exist. Likely the one that the Crown agreed on two of the men, Lysick and Morin, that they didn't partake in. Likely that conspiracy, the one that no longer exists, but that's in the title. So did they do exactly what I expect them to do? Double down on the narrative from February 14, 2022? And why would they do that? The jury has already gone through the evidence and taken a look and came back with reasonable doubt, enough of it to say not guilty. But yet here we are with the media, quote, media. And here they are providing additional information to the public in the form of a expose, some sort of video, 42 minutes long, and 36 people credited with it. Well, on this screen, we're going to have about a dozen total, maybe less. And here's a bunch of Canadians who are far more intimately attached to this issue, and they absolutely know what's going on. And with the exception of one of them, I don't think any of them heard from the CBC on this particular thing. But without further ado, let me go ahead and bring in Betty Carbert. Good evening, Betty. How are you?
Good. How are you, Jason?
I'm good. I got to be honest, I miss you. I enjoyed hanging out with you for the summer.
yeah, I miss you too, and so many others.
Yeah, you passed me a mint when we're hanging out and just chilling at the court, wondering what's going on. And I don't really want to do it again, but I do miss that time with you. So thanks for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. So you've seen this already. So when we go through this, this will be at least a second time for you, yes?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So you are welcome to mute. You're welcome to walk away, come back, whatever works for you if you don't want to sit through some of this again. But I do appreciate that you're here to help fill in some of these gaps because you watched the trial with me. You know Chris very well. You were even in the trial. Some of your messages were there. So you're fully aware of what's going on here more than most people. My first question for you, Betty, before I bring Marco and others on, did they reach out to you? Did they want to talk to you about this?
No.
I'm surprised.
It doesn't surprise me at all because after watching it, I know it's very one-sided and they didn't really want to hear from the other side.
Yeah, it appears that way. And all the clips I've seen and the title alone told me that. So what we're going to have to do with your particular connection is when you're not talking, if you don't mind, mute, and then we'll get you back in because there's a little bit of feedback. But what we'll do now is we'll bring Marco in. Good evening, Marco. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm great as well. Great. Are you sure you're great? Because you know what's coming up. You've seen this episode, yes?
Yeah, a few times now.
Yeah? And you're in it as well?
Unfortunately.
Let's remind people who you are. So we know who Betty is, the mother of Chris. But you're Marco. You're a friend, and you also are party to some of this.
Correct. Yeah, I am. I think my name precedes me to some degree, not in whatever way you would like that to be. But I was at Coutts for the duration of it. I've been involved and sat through as much of the legal proceedings as possible, and I have since been charged and convicted of mischief over 5,000 myself for my behavior down on the border.
Your behavior, so your participation.
Wow. My participation, yeah.
Yeah, and what did the judge end up calling it? Your participation, a leader? Were you an organizer? What did they finally settle on?
Well, I don't know what the exact wording was, but it essentially comes down to the fact that everybody who was on that highway or in the vicinity of the highway is guilty of mischief. They broadened the scope of mischief as a charge. We're going to be hearing more of that in the upcoming weeks here with my new counsel as well. We're going to really focus on that aspect, how they've singled out a few individuals to make an example of.
And it's working so far.
Yeah, for obvious reasons, but there still has to be there's no legal ability. Well, there is obviously legal ability for them to do that, but the precedents they're attempting to set can be challenged with significant case law, and that's the direction we're taking at the 11th hour, unfortunately.
And what a time to be alive, because we even have Pat King's verdict tomorrow. So this is quite the time when it comes to coming to some resolutions and figuring out where we're headed with this. So even tomorrow is going to be a big day. Hello, Jason, Wiretap Media. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jason Stockton, Wiretap Media. I do want to correct you. You said that we're all well informed. I am not. I'm here to learn, ask questions, and find out more about this. I got the Coles notes. You see stuff online, but it's hard to know, what's conjecture, what's opinion, and what's fact. So I want to get the facts and I want to go from there. But I guess I'll turn it back to you there.
What a wonderful introduction. You already fact-checked me on my show. Real time, folks. So real-time fact-checking. He's correct. So I invited a few people who were actually a party to it and know it very well. That'll be Marco, Betty, and we're expecting Alex Van Herk soon. And then also invited some media as well. So Jason and then Jen, because there's going to be a lot of questions from media. And we may have Alex, who's also known as Amazing Zoltan. He may be joining us as well. He's got the link. So the whole idea there was to bring in the parties, bring in some media, and maybe show CBC what they should have done all along if they want to get to the truth. And as we pull apart this episode, I think that's exactly what the media side of this panel will do, is ask the media related questions, the natural ones. So on that note, Jen, you've watched this episode. Thank you for joining us. You're from Western Standard, and I met you at the courthouse, and I'm really appreciative that you're joining us tonight.
Thanks, Jason. I'm really happy to be here. And as the other Jason mentioned, I'm also here to learn and find out more about this because there's so many aspects. And watching the episode, it really left me with even more questions. And as we were chatting before the show, I was texting Jason these questions, and I realized that these are the questions that would have been nice to see the CBC, other mainstream media ask in their reporting. But they went into it as though they had already made up their mind. And even though the verdict was one way, they took the whole episode to really get into what happened at the end.
Well, there you go, Betty. So we have some media here which basically said exactly the same thing that you wrote to the CBC in response to this. There's one side, they told one side, and it looked like they had a narrative and a mission. So would you concur with what Jen's saying here from her perspective?
Absolutely. I agree totally. When you watch this and you experience what happened in court and everything that was brought forward by the Crown and the defense, it was definitely one-sided.
Okay, so now let's get into it because, folks, I haven't seen it. I've seen clips, and of course, a lot of people reached out to me and told me about it. So I'm very disturbed with what I heard. But let's be fair. Let's be, unbiased. Let's go ahead and play it. Let's not just take clips and critique it. Let's watch the whole thing. So what we'll do here, folks, is, and as you're watching, we're going to be pausing. We'll have some comments where it fits and is natural. And please, today is the day to go ahead and throw your questions in as well. We've got some media, we got some family, and we got a participant here. So this is a good group to go ahead and ask your questions to. So throw them into the chat, add that question mark at the beginning, and we'll make sure we get to it. All right.
Can we put our hands up and stop us at certain points too when we might have questions there, Jay?
100%, especially media, because you will know when you have your juices flowing and you have a question. So absolutely, and I'll be ready on that pause the entire time. All right, so let me go ahead and add this to the stage. Oops. I already don't like it. I already don't like it. Okay, so let me just move that little logo of ours and we'll get started here. Okay, Padge. There we go. One more setting. There we go. And here we go.
Early 2022, downtown Ottawa under siege, a face-off over vaccine mandates.
I'm staying. I'm not leaving until the mandates are gone.
Anger spread across Canada. Blockades multiplied. But the RCMP conducted its most serious operation here, on the border with Montana, in the small village of Coutts, Alberta.
Okay, I already have a question from Marco. Marco, we just saw an armored vehicle there, a big black one. Was that in Coutts? Because I heard testimony, but I've never seen video of it.
No, that clip. That was not from Coutts. That clip, I believe, was either from the Ambassador Bridge or the BC entrance. That was not Coutts. That was not a scene shot in Coutts.
Okay, thank you, because we heard about stuff like that, but I've never seen a picture or a photograph from Coutts about that.
I do want to point out too, so like I'm more of a, so my background's in design, video editing, marketing, that sort of thing. Like the media thing I stumbled into because it's just like, it's a brand shift. But the reality is if you look how he started that, he said anger spread across the country. This is a trigger sell point on what you're expected to see. And not one clip did they show any type of anger or any of that. It was, and me personally, I didn't experience that in Ottawa. I did not experience anger. I experienced people with a bit of distaste, but for after being locked up for 2 years, I think people were happy, like for the most part, but that's just me anyway.
No, that's a really good way to do it because they've already framed it incorrectly. Like, whose anger are they speaking about? Because even early in the convoy, Canada was kind of behind it. It was later that they really started to lose favor. So even at the beginning, as they're laying it out here, what anger are they speaking about? Other than being locked down, but even that wasn't anger. We were all happy to find each other. There was a lot of thankfulness that we found each other. So yeah, okay.
And their language right off the start is Ottawa under siege. That's a negative, right?
Yep.
Like they right away set. It's the setting. They've set the narrative. Ottawa under siege. Siege by who? Right? Capital city. Negative, negative, negative.
Now, Jen, in journalism, is there a term for that? Like, are you framing it? Like, are you the once upon a times? Like, is there a term for that when they do it like that? Oh, sorry, we have you muted. Yeah.
Sorry.
You followed instructions very well.
Yeah, right. Not the instructions to turn it back on, though.
Right.
So it is a form of bias. And so in the newsroom, when I might tend to write in a way that inserts my opinion, my editor might say something like, "You've editorialized that sentence, Jen." And so I would say that would probably be the term to refer to it. They're editorializing the perspective that they're giving to the audience. And as you say, the way they frame it too. Mm-hmm.
Now, is the Fifth Estate known for editorial or opinion pieces, or are they framing, or are they known for actual producing facts and news? Like, are we watching a tabloid thing and taking it seriously, or are they really trying to present this as news?
Well, looking back at the history of the Fifth Estate, generally, watching it over the years, I had assessed it to be a fairly well-researched production. Mm-hmm. But as in more recent years, when you do get to see how the mainstream media does have a way of sort of skewing things to be from a certain perspective, because that's the mindset that they approach their work with in general. So I don't see how the Fifth Estate would be an exception exactly. However, I have seen some good work, to be fair, done from the Fifth Estate as well. On this particular matter, I think that it would be really against the grain and against the character of the mainstream media to present it from all sides. And I have a few examples of that we'll discuss as we get into the scenes in this documentary.
Okay, fair enough. And there was no disclaimer at the beginning that said this is fictitious or this is based on or fantasy. Like there was no disclaimer that said some of the names might be real, but the story isn't. So the way I'm taking it is I'm meant to believe this at this stage. Now, Jason, I think you wanted to make a comment there, and then we'll jump back into the next piece.
Oh no, we can go on.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I kind of lost it, so we'll just.
It's okay.
I hope every border in Canada is blocked. I hope the country shuts down.
Some protesters were openly hostile towards the government, police, and mainstream media.
You guys start telling the truth.
You guys have helped destroy this country.
You're the enemy.
Get out of here.
You are the enemy of Canada.
Protesters effectively shut down Alberta's most important port of entry.
Okay, I have to ask, Marco, did you see any hostilities more than what we just saw there, which is a distrust of the media?
No.
That's basically what they're talking about?
Yeah, you're talking strong, like I know the individual, but you're talking a very strong character, extreme frustration with the preceding few years in relation to government overreach. I mean, get out of here. That's what they were telling us to do, and it was kind of like get that camera out of our face, right? You know, but that's frustration. That's a very, very real reaction to what Canadians have been put through.
And also victimization of the media. They seem to be framing that early in this documentary.
And when I hear the word hostile or hostility, I think of like, slapping the camera away or pushing them out of the way, right? It was more or less like, get out of my personal space, like take off, Yeah,
they were not receiving consent to film. That's about it. They should get consent and continue, but no, they were warned or notified. That's not hostility in my books.
No, hostility would be what some of Justin Trudeau's cabinet ministers have done in relation to independent alternative media on the streets. Actual physical alterations. That's hostile. That's right. That's a step further already. So.
Yep. All right. Let's see how we go. How we continue.
To pressure the authorities to withdraw COVID safety measures.
Yeah, we know that guy.
Among those drawn to the protests, Marco van Huigenbos.
It was just a feeling of hope that finally there was a part of society that had said, this is enough.
How had you been feeling during the pandemic leading up to these protests?
Frustration with the COVID mandates, restrictions, the inconsistencies by health authorities and governments.
Where are my brothers? He's right beside you.
Van Huigenbos was a town councillor in nearby Fort Macleod. He quickly became a leader and the face of the Coutts blockade.
This is a big protest. It's a big rally here. I love it. But keeping it peaceful and making sure that nobody steps out of line is our responsibility and my biggest concern.
Protest.
Okay, so Marco, when they approached you for this, what did they pitch you? Did they pitch you, how did they pitch you to get you on the show?
When you say they, I have no idea who this is. This is not the CBC that would have took this particular video. This is something it's probably floating around on the internet. They clipped it. They took it. This could have been CTV. This could have been anybody. This could have been Rebel. Wow. This could have been anybody.
Oh, didn't know that. So they went and found archived video and put it together.
Absolutely. Well, what do you think the first 4 minutes we've seen here? These videos of Ottawa, these hostile individuals. This is all clippings. This is not the CBC on the ground.
No, I get that part, but the interview with you specifically,
it made it look like they were interviewing you.
The interview where I'm sitting in a room with Stephen, that's an interview. That's in my living room.
Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so that.
Sorry. Go on. I thought you were talking about the last
clarify because I thought they just clipped an interview together all of a sudden.
No. That's Stephen, and that's a setup. Like that was, we were set up in my living room for half a day for an hour and a half interview. Yeah. Sorry.
So
what's the question, Jason?
How did they pitch that to you? So when they approached you and said, "We want to come visit you, Fort Macleod guy," they said what?
Oh, they wanted to. They said they were building a documentary, an episode in relation to the Coutts blockade as a whole. and obviously the prosecutions, right? The underlying issue or the underlying narrative of Coutts has been the guns, conspiracy, etc. So I always know when media wants to talk about Coutts that's going to be attached. So that was the discussion, and I remember getting back to them and saying and agreeing to this, and me agreeing to talking to the Fifth Estate is in line with the position I've taken as a whole in relation to all media. I'll talk to anybody. I feel that ultimately it's the responsibility of media or whoever I am having this discussion with to present the facts, to present the whole truth, but ultimately getting put on the hot seat by mainstream media, as biased as they are, has never concerned me. I mean, I can think on my feet, right? I can counter their narrative or what they're trying to establish, which is why I've said off record, even before we started this interview here, or sorry, this show, is I wish they would play the full interview, because there are, if I go back to this interview with Stephen with the CBC, with the Fifth Estate, it was actually a very interesting hour and a half. Like, we really got into some details. He had tough questions. Like, I got to give it to him. Fair, mostly, and at times biased and pointed, direct. And I countered that. So to me, I guess what the fact that they can only find, sorry, Jason, you said 43 seconds or 45 seconds.
Your video, like your interview, what they have an interview, but like if you don't include the B-roll, it's 43 seconds in total.
43 seconds. So of an hour and a half, they can only find 43 seconds where I somehow fit their narrative. Well, that's a win when I'm talking an hour and a half interview. So,
but do you see how they frame it too?
Like I know
they started it by saying there's hostility, you guys were upset, there's anger, and then they clip the one part of how you felt about the time over COVID.
Which was a very fair approach, right? There was nothing real. It wasn't biased. Like, those are my feelings. I'm entitled to those, and they're not. Again, they essentially take nothing of the hour and a half in-person interview and the hour and a half or more we spent in Coutts filming at the saloon. They took nothing of it, and it was obviously because the narrative that we're about to see was not something that my interview supported.
Gotcha. I'd love to see that hour and a half. Maybe there's a request or a document.
Maybe they'll release it. I'll talk to the producers.
Well, they're enough government funded. Maybe you can FOIP them and get a copy. But either case, I'd love to see that. All right.
Investors would gather at a roadside restaurant.
So it's kind of our little headquarters. The Smuggler's Saloon, it's called.
That's Tony's voice.
Fits the names perfect there.
This is Tony Olienick. He drove from Clare's home about 2 hours away, where he ran a gravel pit and trucking company. He filmed regular updates from the protest.
Well, she's 5 a.m. start here, and the little convoy is getting organized. It's going to be a great, marvelous day.
In the early days, it was very, I won't say chaotic because that sounds like there's a riot going on, but it was very disorganized. And it doesn't impact on the airport.
Coutts Mayor Jim Willett and his council were not prepared for their village to be overrun.
It's like herding cats because you get them in a group and you make what you think is a decision and then go out the door and it all goes sideways.
Days into the blockade, police went to smugglers to give protesters an ultimatum: open the highway or be arrested.
We're giving you choices.
Fucking pigs.
In the crowd recording the confrontation, Tony Olienick.
Just trying to intimidate and pressure and coerce a bunch of freedom-loving truckers and people that are here. It's mind-blowing.
I don't know. My wife calls it a spidey sense, like you sense that something is not right.
Now, in full disclosure, that's Jim Willett. He was the mayor of Coutts. I have contacted him to interview. He said he was interested in an interview. However, his committee or his board there would not allow him. So they actually passed a bylaw in Coutts that he is not allowed to give interviews. So hopefully one day we will be able to interview him, but we can't at this stage. Now, Marco, he was at the POEC and he did testify. He testified at your trial, right? But not at Carbert's trial.
Correct. Yeah, he testified at our trial. He was at the POEC. I ran into him at multiple AB Munis conferences. I mean, he tried to meet with me in Coutts, and I knew what he wanted. I knew what he wanted to talk about, and I just wasn't interested in having that conversation, right? So I never did physically meet with him in Coutts, but nice guy all around. His one-liner is it's like trying to herd cats. I've heard him say that probably 50 times. So.
Now, did that ultimatum the police give you guys lead to opening up one lane of traffic?
It did within that preceding 24 hours, but there was a lot of things that happened on that Tuesday, February the 1st. Like a lot. Okay. There was a lot of like they tried to move in, they tried to enforce, which was peacefully. How should I say this? Push back.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a clip from them attempting to enforce, and they were successful in getting 3 owner operators to leave. But after that, the truckers, if you've seen this video from Milk River at that time, you would have seen the tractors break through the barricade about 15 kilometers north on Highway 4 when they seen the police, tactical goose stepping their way down the highway. They seen that on Telegram, Facebook, you name it, and they broke through, and that equipment then formed a fence-to-fence barricade. So we were able to, versus a truck on a highway, they could go truck by truck down a highway and systematically remove truckers or force them to go. But when those truckers and those farmers broke through Milk River, and they showed up in Coutts, we were able to form a live barricade, fence to fence. And then when they made a second attempt to try to forcefully remove us, they were met with this metal line of equipment, from ditch to ditch, with 200, farmers and truckers. So that was there's not a lot of video about it. There is some, but that was when they changed tactics and went to a negotiation approach for the next.
But civil disobedience. Do you agree that civil disobedience requires you, like protest requires civil disobedience to get your voice heard? Like there's
at that time, absolutely. That was the only thing that was. Nothing else worked. Even our representatives, our elected representatives, had lost their voice. We were being run by PIC committees, by emergency management committees. 12 people were governing the province. So there was only one way for the people to have their voice heard. A narrative and a position that everybody seems to have forgotten. I always go back to remember the times we were living in the spring of 2022, in the fall of 2021, into the winter, in the spring of 2022. People like say, oh, you can't block a highway, you can't do this, you can't. Well, remember the times we were living in. But people especially government conveniently likes to forget that.
Absolutely. And they also want to twist the narrative, because I heard overrun or occupied almost. The mayor said that Coutts was overrun. I think it might have been the term he used there. No,
access was restricted to the village for a 48-hour period over that first weekend until a single lane was opened up. There was never any part of the village overrun. If anything, the cafe and
you
the
did
stores,
say that though.
I know they said that, but when I hear overrun, visually,
right.
Like every house is taken over, every street is taken over. People can't even walk out of their house. That's what I visualize when I hear that word.
Right. And he also talked about it being really disorganized. And that was something that I thought was interesting, how the mayor was talking about how disorganized it is. Yet when Marco Mendicino went up and started talking about the Emergency Act, he was talking about how they're extremely organized.
That's right.
And so these authority figures, whenever they're talking about it, it's like they don't have the same information, or they're telling their own part of their narrative. it doesn't add up whatever way you look at it.
Great catch.
Well,
I see you nodding.
the mayor. I can understand the mayor thinking it's unorganized because he's looking in. He's seeing, oh, tractors are moving today. Oh, this shifted. Oh, they got this. Well, that was, I mean, for an event that wasn't planned. I mean, I might not be home tonight. That's how I left my home on January the 29th to something that turned into 18 days. Yes, there was a lot of last minute decisions. There was a lot of decisions that were made that would then be changed because of information, or, you know, you're talking real time. Like, I mean, even the RCMP would have been working in that manner. Oh, sorry.
What made you guys decide to hit the border? What made you, when was the day that you woke up? Like, who started that plan?
Well, were you part of that decision, Mark?
I wasn't. I showed up to Coutts as one of 10,000 people. Like, I joined it. I had wanted to go to Ottawa, couldn't, had a 2-3-year-old baby at home, just wasn't going to happen. But when I heard about Coutts, there was posters circulating. There was a group of people who planned a slow roll to Coutts. Slow roll to Coutts, right? It was exactly that. And you know, without getting myself into trouble here, what ended up happening was a significant inconvenience at the border that day, because they opened up the scales and they got people to turn around, and there was a major traffic jam. But very quickly, yes, there were trucks laying sideways across that intersection. And I always expected it to be 6 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. They'd come in, they'd arrest the people, clean it up. But what a massive failure on their part to allow this, you know, thankfully for us, but to allow this to turn into something that was able to gain a foothold and turn into an 18-day standoff, where they like to say they resolved it or they cleared it. No, we left. There was no clearing 4-wheel drives and, like, I mean, tractors and choppers, and it was a decision to leave based on the information at that time. But I had nothing to do with the initial plan to do the slow roll. When I heard about it, I was on board 110%. But that was not something, like, when people say organizer, that's incorrect. I showed up and very quickly became involved on many different levels, but I was not one of the organizers of the initial slow roll.
And that's the case for everybody. So all the Coutts trio, and for the 4 men, with the exception of maybe Tony, who was part of the Claire's home portion, but nobody was an organizer.
He got asked.
Exactly, but nobody was an organizer. So, and that's what I'm saying, Marco. He's the closest to it because he kind of just did the Claire's home one, but that's it. But he's just following the posters somebody else put out there. In fact, I was in the trial. You may have missed that part, Marco, but the sharing of the poster that started this was part of the trial too. And all the men received it from somewhere else. They weren't part of the originating group.
Now, I do have to ask, just because, like, I have to be fair. And, you know, there's a lot of speculation that this was a massive planned event, and that, you know, it wasn't this grassroots movement that took over the country. Now, a lot of people did come from Western Canada to Ottawa. So my question is this: were there people that organized with people in Ottawa that organized the Coutts and the Manitoba blockade?
No, there was
no connection. It was just, soon as they saw them jump into Ottawa, they're like, well, we got to do something too, and they went to Coutts.
I
think, you remember
Jason,
the hype as the convoy rolled across the country.
Of course. Like, I left London, Ontario. I drove 8 hours to Ottawa, right?
And And from my perspective, Jason, from my interviews, the common thing is people wanted to go to Ottawa, but they couldn't commit the time or do the drive or have the expense. They wanted to be part of it. And as a secondary type of thing is basically what kind of formed in Coutts, because these are all people that would have gone to Ottawa if they could afford to, had the time and was able to, but they didn't, couldn't, and wasn't. So they went down south to do it.
Yeah, I don't think I want to be fair and non-biased, right? That's my only angle. I'm not saying that there was this big conspiracy or anything like that, but just for anyone watching who has had those thoughts, it's good to ask these questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, in the trial, it never came out. So in the trial, they talked about Alberta people. So Red Dog something, I can't remember his full name, his name came up, and a lot of Alberta people's names came up, but none of the names that went to Ottawa. So we didn't hear like Leach or Barber or anything like that come up in either trial. None of those names were there. The closest we can get to, in all fairness to your question, Jason, is they were looking for Jeremy McKenzie's connection to all the men, and that came out in the trial, but they found no connections on any of the phones or anything like that. So that would be, I would say, the closest name that came up in the trial that was also in Ottawa, but there was nothing brought forward in the trial that actually connected it, other than the authorities' desire to try and find a connection, and they didn't succeed at finding a connection when it came to the men's phones, because all 4 of their phones were searched for that.
And that's why we're having this conversation. We can dispel those conspiracies, right?
Well, we're just here for the truth, because that's what happened.
Yeah. It was in solidarity.
No,
there was zero affiliation. I remember going home and having to catch up as to what happened at the same time in a different part of the country. You see things come across, but you're so preoccupied and so busy with your own events to some degree that I had to catch up and become aware of what happened in Ottawa, what happened in Emerson, what happened in the Ambassador Bridge. But like even with Diagolon, I never heard about Diagolon until days or weeks after the Emergencies Act was implemented, right? So it was not something that was in play at Coutts. Never was, never will. That's factual. I don't give a shit what anybody says.
Yeah, and I would concur with that with all my interviews. And another thing that I did learn, Jason, is there were a lot of people who were grabbing streams from across Canada and bringing it together and commentating on it. So you saw that happen. So people were talking about Coutts, talking about Ottawa in the same stream, but they weren't coordinated. They didn't like have a team, and that wasn't media or in any way, shape, or form that I found. And that includes Pat King, Barber, Leach, Marco's trial and the Carbert's trial. So 5 trials or 4 trials really that I've witnessed. None of them have been linked and connected at any level that I found so far.
Cool.
All right. Let's go ahead and continue. Jen, if you have a question, go ahead, but we can keep going.
Let's keep rolling.
The RCMP also sensed something wasn't right. Kelly Sundberg took a look at the police investigation for the Fifth Estate. He's a criminologist at Mount Royal University and walked us through how police identified the 4 men.
Okay, those are the ITOs. What he's holding in his hands, I believe those to be the ITOs, the information to obtain. These are the documents used for the search warrant. It's about 100 pages, we know that, and we don't have a copy, Jason, but other news organizations do have a copy, obviously CBC.
How do we get our hands on that?
I have copies.
There's one answer right there, and it's also under publication ban, this particular document. So even if we had it, we couldn't talk about it yet. But that's what I believe he's holding in his hands, because that's the only document that exists that has a police narrative is the ITOs.
But that also leaves the door open for this guy to just lie about it then.
Mm-hmm. And this entire document is Canadian Anti-Hate Network and Vice Media and the whole Diagolon narrative. That's what's in this document. And this never left the bail hearings, because this was in the bail hearings they brought this up, but not the trial.
Okay.
So you can see how they're painting this. So they're going to talk about this ITO document right now, and they're going to talk about it like it's true. This was never brought into the trial as evidence. It was never challenged by the defense. There's no experts that went through this. In fact, the judge threw out the warrants that was created by this document. So this document led to the search warrant for Joanne Person's place, and that warrant was tossed by Lebrun's during the pretrial. So for them to even bring this document up, this is This is as fake as any Canadian Anti-Hate Network report out there. It's already been debunked. The trial didn't use it, and I don't know why CBC is bringing it forward like this, other than to do their narrative.
Well, I know why. Technically, this film is 2 years late. I did my interview in November of 2022.
Hold on a second. This interview that we saw here is November 2022?
I believe the majority of this episode was filmed in the fall and winter of 2022. Now, they've definitely added things on the tail end, right? You know, the verdict day, in the courtyard, certain details. But the majority of these commentators, of these individuals, these interviews are with the limited amount of information in front of the courts at that time. It's almost like we're going back 2 years and
reliving it,
listening to the narrative, the public narrative at that time, and they failed to update what's happened since. But that's, I mean, I've realized that before, but now that we're saying that with these ITOs, I remember pre-trial, and this might even be before you came into the proceedings, Jason, but I remember the public narrative out there, the one that the media had painted and spun, and the fact these men were incarcerated and we're in pre-trial, we're going through certain pre-trial applications and things like that, and regarding the ITOs and all that. There was very limited information. So would the Fifth Estate have had access to more information? Maybe. They've said they've had access to a lot of information. They've gained access. But they've also said, later on, we've done 3 years of investigative journalism. So a massive failing to bring the latest, for example, how the trial concluded, the convictions, the acquittals, etc. A massive failing on their part, unless this was a beginning and there's a second episode coming, which is not the truth, which is not the case. So it does explain a bit of it, but to me, it was like, well, maybe this episode should just not have aired as a whole. They should have just realized that the story had changed, the narrative had changed, the truth has come out, and this is no longer the truth. This may have been a truth in the fall of 2022, based on the limited amount of information available to the public, etc. But this is no longer the truth, and that's why we're having such difficulty with this episode as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And maybe the jury did not give them the ending they were expecting.
Exactly.
Yep, the jury did not give them.
They actually do say something to that effect in this documentary. And I think what Mark was saying actually is giving CBC the benefit of the doubt. Because, well, I mean, in a way, right? Because we're trying to address this like unbiased. So I agree. Come to think of it, it does look like a lot of this footage and the interviews were done at that time when they were interviewing the guy from the Anti-Hate Network. We'll see that later on. Sorry, not to get too ahead of our scene here. But it does seem like the way that they're approaching their interviews are from that time frame. However, there are scenes that are updated from the verdict, as you said, and this has still been edited recently. This has all been gone through from their whole team and it's been given the go-ahead as is. So it very well could have been filmed while they were thinking, oh, they're going to get convicted of this conspiracy. But that's not the way that it worked out. And so you'll have to go back and edit the documentary to update that. But they either didn't bother or they just wanted to continue this narrative. And watching it for the first time myself, I was inclined to think the latter.
Now, I did invite the two contacts I have there, Rachel Ham, is it? Or was it
Ward.
Marco? Ward.
Rachel Ward, the producer.
Yeah, and then the other gentleman who gave me a response. He said he came late to the game. He doesn't know much going on. He didn't think he'd add any value to today's episode. So we did reach out to the Fifth Estate to be on this episode. They declined. All right, let's go ahead.
I think that they realized that through their existing network of information and intelligence that this was gathering momentum and very quickly, and that it could get out of control. Moving the undercover officers in there was a prudent step.
After a week of trucks blocking the highway, the RCMP sent undercover officers to infiltrate Smuggler's Saloon to understand what the protest leaders were planning.
So this is not a simple operation.
Okay, I just want to just touch this framing. They were walking around with a camera, kind of giving you the impression that the undercover did that. There was no recordings from the undercovers, no audio, no video, no nothing. So at any point, if you're looking at this and you think, oh, that might be an undercover video, there is none.
I don't believe that.
I know, but
I don't believe that.
Oh, I know. Jason, you and I should sit down because I actually know when in the transcripts and when in the trial we should focus on that particular issue. And I also believe Tony Olienick's video, his interview, exposes them on that particular issue because they talk about a transcript. But anyways, another day for that one, Jason, but I agree with you. I think they're lying.
These are very tight communities for 5 outsiders to just show up. So these are highly skilled officers that were clearly very effective in their duties.
I want to stop that. The agents describe in their own words.
That's his whole introduction is intellectually dishonest on so many levels. This is a criminologist that is spouting to the public as an expert that he went through these documents, that we've all seen the DAG reports and the DAG files, and it was just basically a giant circle jerk. You know, it was a total joke. There were even police officers in those documents, and if it's provided it's close to the same thing or it has the same information, who said, who made the Canadian Anti-Hate Network a reliable source? Like, where are we getting this information from? And the fact that this guy is just drawing blanket statements that this was excellent police work. No, like that is just so dishonest to do that. But anyway.
Betty's nodding, and I agree with everything you just said there, Jason.
Yeah. They didn't even know who they were looking for. You know, they make it sound like those poor guys were on their radar. But none of these guys even had a past history with the law. And so how did they end up with those folks?
In my disclosure, which is almost identical to theirs, the Coutts trio, it's pretty much the same, some a little more redacted at times, but the undercovers went in to identify the leadership of the organization. That was why the undercovers went in to start off with. And there was a list of individuals that were on that, myself included. Like, there was multiple moments in the first 10 days before I think there was a comment from Tony Olienick, allegedly, that would have drawn, pulled them toward this conspiracy aspect, toward these guns, toward more serious concern in their eyes, and away from identifying the leadership or the structure or the financing of the of the blockade in their mind, the language they use, right? But what brought the undercovers in was not these 4 men. In their undercover, in their work, they met up and they ended up talking to Tony Olienick, among others, who then proceeded to introduce them to Chris and maybe even Jerry. But it was not the way that CBC is filming it in this, or it's not
portraying it.
Portraying it, exactly. That's incorrect. Factually incorrect in relation to the RCMP's actual investigation. So it's skewed. It's not real investigative journalism.
And to tie this together for you, Jason, Stephen Johnston, in the pre-trial, during his arguments about whether or not the warrants were valid, the question came up on why there was no recordings from the undercovers. And his argument to the judge at that time was, we didn't know any of these names, so we couldn't have put it down. And we didn't know what we were looking for. So we didn't have enough information to get a warrant to record as the undercovers, because that's required in Canada now. They actually need a warrant to record as an undercover. And his argument on why they couldn't is they didn't have enough information and they had no names at that time. So Betty's absolutely correct. They went in there not knowing what they're looking for, and Marco's correct because that was in the trial. They were looking for leaders, and they found Tony, some other people. So I agree. Marco's right about this. The framing of this is disingenuous. It's factually not correct and not fair, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
All right. And Zoltan might be hanging out with us too. It looks like he's trying to connect. So Zoltan, amazing Zoltan. Alex, I don't know if you can hear us, but welcome. All right, let's continue.
What happened next? A protester calls Tony Olienick a leader, so the undercover officers arrange to meet him. Olienick tells them he sees the blockade as a revolution.
These officers not only had to play the role that they did, but then they had to go and create the reports to activate the next phase.
Olienick says he's been surveilling the police's movements and considers himself protest security, along with Chris Lysak from nearby Lethbridge. Olienick describes Lysak as a hitman, a sharpshooter, and a long-range sniper.
Okay, I want to be clear to the audience watching. There's no recording of any of those statements. Those are all from the notes of the undercover operatives. They did not actually have a recording of Chris, Tony, anybody talking like that. These were the notes from the undercovers. And I'm really glad that this gentleman said, and then they created their reports. I believe that's correct. Instead of recording their reports, they recreated their reports. I'm pretty happy he used that particular word.
I'm glad you picked up on that wordplay.
Well, I'm paying attention because I haven't seen this before. And they didn't record their reports. They absolutely, I agree. They created them.
Yep.
I won't leave until shit changes. Written in stone. My kids aren't going to grow up in this shit.
The undercover officers also report back that Olienick boasted of stockpiles of guns and thousands of rounds of ammunition, enough to outfit every protester and smugglers to fight if they needed to, and that he believes cops should all be hung.
This launched the investigation from simply a intelligence
Can we pause?
position to, oh my God.
So, I don't know if we can pause there and if you can hear me, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Hey, so in the trial, Tony never said that all cops should be hung. I believe the phrasing that he used was, they will hang themselves by their own words. And again, there's no recording of this, but Jason, you were there, and I believe that's what the undercover said.
Okay, so you're actually referring, there's a couple times where similar stuff was talked about that you're talking about here, and I think that you brought up one that they're not talking about here. There are some text messages, Alex, between Tony and some others that they're referring to here. You're correct, these are recordings, but there is some text messages that did have that wording. So we're going to be fair about this, because I think there's two situations you're talking about. One where he was talking about what you just said there. They basically created their own situation. They're going to hang themselves for it because they're messing up. Yes, that was something that was there. But there was also some text messages that did have this wording. But not in the context that they're framing it. So let's be fair there too. Not in the context that they're framing it here. It wasn't in the context that he wants that to happen. It was more in the context that if they continue to go after Canadians in the bigger picture, that's the kind of thing that might happen. But I don't recall it being specifically he felt cops needed to be hung.
Okay, but if I guess that plays on both. So if they did have that text correspondence and it wasn't framed the way they wanted it to, that still is dishonest, because he was making a general blanket statement that this is what it could lead to if this continues, if the lockdowns, if they keep on kids are getting beat up on Calgary skating rinks, that sort of stuff. Yeah. So it's still, at the end of the day, it's dishonest. It's a dishonest framing of what he was actually saying.
Correct. And what actually Tony said in his interview, what they're not playing is repeatedly over and over again. We want the police to join us. We want you to work with us. We're worried about other forces outside of the country, foreign forces. Over and over again in his interview, he was working with the police, was his hope and his plan that they would join together. There was no animosity or threat towards the police in the whole interview. And they're not playing that part. They're not showing that part, because Tony was very clear that he did not want to hurt. He wanted to work with the police. And Alex Zoltan, you probably remember some of that too, because we've seen his interview now, and he talked like that the entire time. He was trying to coordinate or cooperate.
Yeah, I remember that, and I think there's also kind of a loss of the distinction between cause and intent here as well, right? Like you can have cause to dislike somebody, but that doesn't mean that you have intent to hurt them. You can have cause to want to see somebody be hurt, but that doesn't mean that you intend to do it yourself. I mean, people make these kind of statements all the time.
Exactly.
Sure, and I can make the statement that...
Yep. I was just going to say there isn't a person out there that hasn't said some stupid comment in their life, but that doesn't mean they were going to act on it.
I do it every day.
We're blowing up the CBC's narrative right now. We're blowing them up right now. Could that be taken as violence? Because what we're doing is working on this. Betty, you're absolutely right. And we all say things, and that doesn't mean the intent is there. So thanks for that highlight there, Alex.
This could unfold into a firefight. This could unfold into extreme violence.
Meanwhile, the agents continue to gain Olienick's trust. He introduces them to another protester, Chris Carbert, also from Lethbridge and Lysak's childhood friend.
There's no excuses. This is war.
Olienick and Carbert take the agents to meet a fourth man, Jerry Morin. Olienick had met Carbert and Morin a few months earlier. Police had arrested Morin at an
Again, where's this? Is that Calgary? Is that Ottawa? Because that's not Coutts. Anybody
Calgary,
know?
Probably.
I believe that's Calgary.
Okay.
Mask rally back in 2020. The agents, Carbert and Olienick, then drove to the train tracks to meet Jerry, who is coming with the package. Olienick tells the officers it's coming in a hockey bag, and reportedly nods when they ask if he's talking about guns. RCMP handlers told the agent...
This is hearsay, right? This is hearsay evidence. There's no proof to back up these statements, correct?
There's no hockey bag. There's no statement. The word hockey bag, the first time I heard it was Jim Willett talking about his wife, so the mayor's wife, talking about a hockey bag. I didn't see this in the evidence. Marco, you have disclosure. Where in the evidence is a photograph or more information about a hockey bag?
Other than in the UCO notes, there's none. There's no pictures.
Correct. So all the stuff you're seeing here, Jason, is from the notes that were created. Thankfully, they said created.
And you know what my concern about this hockey bag has been all along? Because I believe it'll be in here. They said that for the undercover safety, they told them to leave. And I don't understand that. If the RCMP believed a stash of guns were coming in, why didn't they have somebody follow them all the way? Because if they were so worried about the lives of others, but they were going to let these people walk in with them because for the safety of two RCMP undercovers, that doesn't make any sense to me.
So this is another thing. Why did they, how come they had, because they said in total there was 5 officers, correct?
4 female and 1 male. Yep.
Okay, so why would they have them separated and not together? Like, I would think it's a lot more believable if like 3 people came together, and I wouldn't, because like, oh, they just came in from northern part of Alberta or something, right? Instead of like each individual acting like they don't know each other and they're there by themselves. So why is it that the police didn't put more than one officer in a situation so that they corroborate each other's stories?
So they kind of did. So they were in pairs. So the 2 females worked a lot. There was 2 pairs. So there was a female and an undercover female. That was the first pair. And then one of them stayed. So 1548, I think was her number or something like that. And then she was paired with another person. So there was really two periods where there was pairs. What you're highlighting here, Jason, is great because in the trial, we heard under cross-examination from basically every undercover, they were told never to separate, never to get into a vehicle, and make sure that they were recording everything, like their notes and stuff, the best they could. But not only did they separate, they got into separate vehicles and went ahead and did that. And they were also told to stand down and not go down to the what they call the transfer from Jerry Morin. But they disobeyed, and this is their own testimony. They disobeyed the order, went down there anyways because they thought they needed to collect the license plates and some more information. And then the last point that you made, Donald Betts made that on the show. Why in the world did they not roll in and arrest everybody if they thought there were guns coming in? Why did they let them walk in, like Betty's saying? If they truly believed at any point, even a small firearm is making its way through, for the public peace, we'd expect them to take action. They've admitted now, if they do believe that, they've admitted to gross negligence when it comes to the safety of the public, because the police are now saying, we knew that guns were coming in on his bag, but we did nothing about it. I believe, Jason, the narrative is they knew all along there was nothing coming. That's what really happened here.
Can I add to that in relation to, safety of the public? We know that earlier on in the protests there was a rumor of a handgun or a firearm in a truck that was parked in the Milk River, and SWAT or tactical, the RCMP surrounded that truck, dealt with it. I don't think they found anything, or they did. It was a clip. It was not. It was a clip.
Yeah, they found a clip.
So
no firearm. A clip.
Correct. So that falls in line as well as the UCO's the operation in relation to Quebec. That falls in line with the RCMP's position as an organization. They're a risk-adverse organization compared to other national police forces across the world. The RCMP is a risk-adverse organization. They don't allow their people, they don't allow their officers into situations. They try to avoid all risk at any cost. Not shoot first, ask questions. Well, pretty much, shoot first, ask questions later. Whereas in the United States, you have different policing organizations that they're always dealing with civilians that could be they could be concealed carried, could be guns everywhere, right? Their rights are a lot different than ours. So what I'm saying is that what you mentioned, Jason, you're talking about the knowledge that they allegedly had based on these legal proceedings, based on the narrative they tried to put into the courts through testimony, through the UCOs, of firearms that made their way into the blockade that they were aware of. What I don't understand is that in all my interactions, as the individual who interacted with the RCMP the most, at times exclusively, bronze, like command triangle, you name it, mostly bronze, right? Silver and gold were off-site, but never once was there a serious concern for the well-being of their officers, where the CCMGs were pulled back, or the public was advised to do anything different. No, there was never a moment where an organization that has throughout its history taken all necessary precautions for the safety of its own members and the safety of the public behaved in a manner that would have led to the narrative that there was going to be a shootout and a firefight with the RCMP at this protest. Never once. So this was created after. This narrative was created after the arrest. This was a bunch of... So anyway, I'll rest my case.
And Jason, what it reminds me of is September 11th, ironically, the stand-on orders where they said don't take any action when they should have. The plane was going towards Washington, D.C., and they were standing down. It feels the same way, like they didn't take the precautionary, but they're trained for protection. They didn't do it this time around.
But even if you listen to that criminologist, he said that this was becoming apparent that this was going to be an extreme violent situation, that it was ramping up. But yet you guys have stated that these police officers separated and they got into, like, they felt comfortable enough that they could disobey orders, knowing that their lives were not threatened, that they could get into separate vehicles and separate from one another. But yet they're painting this picture that there's going to be an extreme gunfight.
Correct. And they want you to believe they sent in 4 females and 1 male, and that was all the protection that they had. Like they want you to believe that they sent him into that gunfight too.
So they're taking like actual notes from the police officers. So that means that, you know, whether it's that Graveling guy or whoever, they've gotten information about the court case. Why wouldn't they? How can they frame it? How could they allow the criminologist to frame it like that when it's completely dishonest?
Welcome to CBC.
Well, in all fairness to the criminologist, he's actually going off the RCMP's narrative. He's going off the ITOs and the information given him. I can't completely criticize him for what he doesn't know, having been on the ground, knowing what the UCOs know, knowing what bronze, silver, and gold level
that's fair.
Command structure at that point. He's just speaking to. He's obviously being interviewed in relation to that document that was presented to him, and that document was, I guess, highly incriminating. Sorry, it was. I mean, that's what the Crown attempted to use to throw away the keys on these men. So, without being, I mean, I think he should have. I guess they're forced to comment on ongoing cases, even though they waited to release this until the case had reached its conclusion, appeals aside. But it's an opinion, and what I find so very unfortunate about this whole episode is a organization that through the decades has focused on investigative journalism, which one would conclude to be facts, trying to narrow down to the facts, bringing it down to what actually happened, the real truth of the matter. This whole thing is built off of the opinions of individuals whose opinions are being built off of the single-sided narrative that the RCMP has provided them through these producers, right? So it's so.
I just want to throw this at Jen because, so Jen, when you started this, like I was of the same opinion as you with the Fifth Estate, that I thought they were reasonable, expert investigations, at least maybe 10, 15 years ago. Like you could always count on them to really dig into the truth. After you watch this, are you doubting every single episode you've ever watched?
I am.
I am too. Like even Sesame Street, I doubt now.
I think that critical lens is necessary when looking at whatever the mainstream media is putting out. So whenever they're covering any kind of investigation, you do have to ask, well, what are they trying to achieve with this narrative?
Yeah.
We got to remember where their funding comes from too.
Yeah.
And so even before the Trudeau government started handing all over these subsidies over a few years ago, and they weren't getting all of that federal funding, you still have to wonder, where is this mentality coming from? This extreme, getting more and more extreme, but this leftist perspective. And so you see it in institutions, in universities, and it's more than just one media company having one frame of mind. It's universal, and it's quite interlocked too. Like you see these institutions moving in grid step. So I think that that's why having these discussions where we are just wanting to find out what really happened, I think that that's what's refreshing to people, and what lots of Canadians are thinking is what really happened. It's easy to, when you're watching a documentary like this and you don't have that kind of background of understanding that this might not be the whole story, or this could be a completely skewed story altogether that's bereft of fact, that it's very easy to go along with it and maybe start buying into it and believing it and start thinking, oh, well, maybe like that jury should have had a different opinion or something. Because even in this documentary, there's a comment that says something along those lines. So it's, as we talked about earlier, it is editorializing that kind of perspective. And when people tune into shows like this, they see, oh, well, maybe those questions actually are okay to ask. And that breaks down the walls of the CBC.
Yeah.
And I'll just, before we start to play again, I'll just also add, Jason, and I said this on a podcast just recently, Frontier Foundation or something like that. I think everybody was afraid. I think the RCMP was fed a lot of fear as well. I don't think that they internally knew what was going on. I think there was a few people at the top that was literally telling members, rah rah rah, you're going to go, they're going to try and kill you, they're trying to hang you, they're going to destroy you. And they left those meetings really thinking that they were in danger. We even heard about officers breaking down and crying when a tractor's driving. Like, I think the hyper fear that even happened at the RCMP side of things was fabricated and created for the purpose of having them on edge. And I also saw the same thing in the Crown's office, believe it or not. And I don't want people to be mad at me, but during the trial, there was a time where the Crown's office was surprised at what they learned during the trial because the information was different from the RCMP. And this is Jacqueline, where her location was during Jerry's arrest. The Crown said Jacqueline was in the truck. She was not. And later in the trial, that was clarified and corrected. But the Crown themselves was surprised to find that detail was incorrect. So, Jason, I think there was fear all over the RCMP and the Crown's office as well. There are some people, I do believe, who were stoking that and creating that and knew that it was a fabrication of fear. But some of the actions out of the RCMP, like driving through Coutts super fast and all this kind of stuff, does lead me to believe that they were actually in fear of their lives. Not justified, but during the time. I think there was a lot of that going around.
Okay.
No, I would dispute that.
Okay.
Well, you were there, so you actually
dispute?
spoke to them, so you would know far better than
myself and everybody at Coutts would dispute the fact that, other than officers who obviously weren't very happy with the level of disrespect, what they viewed as disrespect or lack of respect for what they were used to the authority that they used to have on any regular given day. I mean, there was a very high level of civil disobedience happening in and around Coutts those 18 days. But the engagements were friendly and surface level. But even my engagements with command structure, hours at a time in sheriff buses alone, there was never any discussion around concern or fear regarding escalation due to firearms or things like that. There was concerns about the tractors, absolutely. And I mean, in and of themselves, the tractors are dangerous to non-farmers. I mean, they're not, but I can understand the level of concern for public safety. The public safety viewpoint at the protest, at the Milk River, the Coutts locations, those were the biggest issues that the RCMP, and even myself, I shared that. I didn't want anybody to get run over. That would be horrible. That would be horrible headlines. So were they stoking fear to officers manning checkpoints, etc.? No, I don't believe so, because this narrative did not exist during the event. It was built post implementation of the Emergencies Act.
That's thank you, because I am coming post, right? I wasn't there, and I'm trying to even give him some benefit of the doubt, like the Brian officer that we heard from and stuff like that, and the driving through Coutts really quick and stuff like that.
Sure, they drove quick, but I mean, it wasn't the highway wasn't being used, right? It was a 4-lane highway, 2 ways each way with no traffic.
So this makes it worse for them. So there really was no reason for them to have this kind of response.
You know what I find interesting? It shows how easy the public flips on a dime, right? So if we look back, a few years ago, there was the whole defund the police agenda and, loosening up on restrictions and that sort of stuff. And then CBC puts out a podcast called The Pressure Cooker. And that's a podcast series about two individuals that after right around the same time the Boston Marathon bombing happened, these two RCMP individuals coerced two Muslims who were drug addicts to do a staged bombing in Vancouver on Victoria Island during Canada's Day. Now, if we look now, it's like everyone forgets that, okay, maybe the RCMP would do nefarious things. You know what I mean? Maybe these undercovers would lie. And But now what they're doing is they're framing it that if you believe that the RCMP undercover officers would ever do anything nefarious like this, you're a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
You know what
You
I
sound
mean?
like the judge, because the judge actually said stuff along those lines. You shouldn't doubt the police, basically, the judge said.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yep. Okay. Basically, he took everything they said as gospel. He said any inconsistencies were human error. But when Chris Carbert had inconsistencies, that was a lie. But when the undercovers do it, it's just human error. Yeah, he echoed what you just said there.
Okay, well, then.
All right.
Yeah, let's
believe for their own safety.
As soon as those officers heard that, and you can see that from the court documents, they very quickly realized that imminent danger existed.
The Fifth Estate obtained heavily redacted, handwritten police reports. An agent on the ground said they suspected a cache of firearms and warned the protest had become...
Before, just a minute ago, they said that they confirmed that there were firearms coming in a duffel bag, and now they suspect that there's guns. That's all.
And the truth is, the warrant was thrown out because they had no reasonable or probable cause for firearms.
Okay, well then, yeah. All right.
That's the decision of the judge.
Okay.
A breeding ground for extremists. The next day, an officer reports on a conversation with an unnamed source. Concern can get violent. Civil war, and see government removed.
They had to act quickly because the more unknown elements makes it more dangerous, more unpredictable what the outcome will be.
Fearing the worst.
I'm just doing a quick one here. Every statement about civil war in the entire thing, it was always framed as, we hope we don't get to a civil war. That's always the framing of it. Never once at one point did anybody say this might be a civil war. They always said, I hope it doesn't turn into that. If we continue down these roads in Canada, it might turn that way. There was never, even with Tony Olienick, a statement that there would be a civil war in Coutts. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mark or Betty, but that framing really bothered me right there.
That's what bothered me a lot, because they never said they were going to go to war in Coutts. It was mentioned that maybe this would be a civil war, which means Canada, not Coutts, eh? And but they kept making it sound like these guys were planning to start a war right there in Coutts.
Correct.
Yeah, the only reference of war in relation to the events of the moment are Jerry Morin's comments on the morning of the 14th when he hears of the arrests. The video we've seen earlier where he's in his truck going to work, which comes up, we'll touch base on that later, or we already did, but he says, this is war. That's in relation to them, the RCMP, moving in with tactical, etc.
So the blockade was...
But Jerry moved, he wasn't there. No. The blockade would have been we would have been leaving within hours. Sorry,
well, that comment by Jerry...
The decision was made within hours that day, and we stayed till the next morning as an agreed upon retreat, or however you want to call that, retreat. I want to use that language because that means where I were, but
regrouping at another location.
Regrouping. Yeah.
But what I want to get at here is Jerry's comment happened in a small window. So the arrest happened in the morning of February 14th for Carbert, and Jerry was arrested by noon. So any comment he made would have been during that morning of February 14th. And
those are his comments in his truck, hours away from this event.
Correct. So they're not in the ITOs. They're not in the ITOs. The police are not aware of it. This is not the reason for the search warrants or anything like that. This is all after.
Yeah, Jerry was, as an individual who was at the blockade off and on with Jacqueline 2-3 times over the course of those days, the second week, third week, he's not a big part of the ITOs until later on, until he gets drawn into added to this investigation via wiretaps, etc. So, again, and I'll just end it with this. The criminologist mentions the RCMP or the authorities had to move fast. Except that's not what they did. There was nothing fast at all. I mean, it was days, the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, into the morning of the 14th.
Yeah.
That's not,
Yeah,
that's not
imminent
fast.
danger. They said imminent danger, and yet they wait 4 more days to do anything.
Correct. And I think the trigger, not to use that particular word, was at that time, Lysick and Carbert were both making text messages that they were going home the next day. They were going to go back to see their family the next day. They were going to go see their kids. So I think that might have been the trigger to speed up things because they were about to leave. February 14th, Jason, had it came and gone without the arrest on the 13th, the 2 of the men definitely would have been home for Valentine's Day. So that might have been the reason why they sped things up a little bit from their perspective.
No, that's not why.
No?
This
Okay,
goes, this
well,
goes
glad
beyond,
you're here.
this goes beyond Coutts. It goes beyond Alberta, and it goes back to Ottawa as to the why.
Yes.
As to the why and the when. And the why and the when, and if you go back to the POEC and you go back to the oh man, I did a full-blown in-depth I took a deep dive into this earlier this spring in relation to the information that was presented at the archives, what would you call that the POC would have had available other than cabinet confidentiality. No, the Trudeau's they put together a committee when the protests started, and if you look at the timeline in relation to the arrests here, with the time difference in relation to how things developed in Ottawa in relation to Trudeau making that decision to implement the Emergencies Act, to then informing his cabinet, right, and to then informing the Liberal caucus and the premiers. He was obligated to inform the premiers, not they had no say other than they were informed that he was looking to implement the Emergencies Act. There's a timeline there. I've taken that timeline. I mean, I could go back. I don't have it with me right now, unfortunately. I've taken that timeline and I've aligned it with the timeline in Coutts. We keep on thinking that the information flowed out of Coutts in relation to this conspiracy, but I'm sorry, the information flowed into Coutts.
Absolutely.
It came from the top. Coutts, conspiracy, firearms, and if Marco Mendocino's comments come up here shortly, they needed this a certain way, and they had enough. They had a truth. They had the truth of there were firearms in the vicinity of the protest. They built off of that to implement.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and we also heard that in the pre-trial, a police officer on February 10th, when they were starting to put this together, the undercover stuff, she used the term, we hoped we would find guns. She used the term hope, Jason. So what that tells me is it was a mission they wanted to accomplish. You hope to find the missing girl as a police officer. You hope to find the missing person. You don't hope to find dangerous weapons in a protest. You hope you don't find them. That's the real hope. So that particular word, and I think Marco, of course, nailed it. He's looking at this timeline very closely. That starting February 10th, they absolutely wanted to find guns of any kind. And I have seen information that on February 12th is when the Emergencies Act was already basically being shared internally so that everybody saw it on February 12th, which means by February 14th, they were ready to go. So maybe it's a combination of everything here, Marco. Maybe the fact that these couple of the men were about to leave was a catalyst to start now, but they had everything prepared to go anyways. So maybe it happened quick from their perspective because a couple of the guys might be leaving, or maybe it just happened to be timed that way. Either way, I don't like this. Like when you're telling me the information is coming in, you're really telling me that this is a bigger conspiracy.
And this isn't just me. I have proof.
I'm not doubting it. It's just it's a
no.
lot.
But let me add this to the audience. Let me, and this may come out. I mean, there's a time and a place, but I have proof of senior investigators out of Airdrie. So that's RCMP command in Alberta that have told me there was significant pressure from Ottawa. Right? This is not Brenda Lucky hearing about this? Well, they heard about the guns. So the flow of information went two ways, right? The weapons, the firearms, it then turned into this press conference, which turned into the implementation of the Emergencies Act. That's something they were talking about, previous Justice Minister Lametti or whatever his name is. He was talking about the Emergencies Acts and tanks before the Freedom Convoy even showed up in Ottawa. There was text messages that showed up at the POEC in relation to that. So these people, they wanted to do this. They needed a catalyst. They needed something to legitimately sell the implementation to the public. We also now know that Justice Mosley has deemed it unconstitutional, thankfully, also not mentioned in this episode at all.
We also
at
know,
all,
Marco,
not a mention of it, but here we are. So
we
the
also know,
information goes
Marco,
away.
from the ATIP documents that I think it was as early as February 5th, if I'm not mistaken, the RCMP was targeting protesters based off of cross-referencing them with the gun registry. So they were looking for people that own guns.
Yes.
So, and that's all well documented and known now. So they were certain to have found guns if they had arrested the right people that they had cross-referenced with the gun registry. You'd expect them to have guns.
Well, Tony and Chris were in a hunting trailer. It's actually labeled the bullet trailer, not because we're being sneaky or cheeky about it. It's a brand. It's a hunting trailer. So if they were looking for guns in Alberta, it wouldn't take you long. But now whether or not they were illegal or used for illegal purposes, that's where the narrative comes in.
Was this gun hunt transpiring around the time that the RCMP was also looking for influence from Jeremy McKenzie and Diagolon?
All of it. Yeah, from February 10th.
This was before there was any media connection between Diagolon and the protesters. Like that narrative didn't come up till February 14th. So this would have been a week or two before that, even. The gun hunt, as you call it, which is a pretty accurate phrase.
You could probably connect the dots that there were internal discussions about going out to find Diagolon, to find that influence.
I would even suggest they knew Diagolon at that stage wasn't anything to be worried about, to be honest with you, because they didn't even pick up a single one of them, or even
the documents. The documents from the Hategate file shows even prior to the protests that Diagolon was not a threat.
Exactly, and that's actually why I'm asking, because even though that was debunked by Hategate last year, the RCMP still was pursuing this, and you saw this in the media too. I mean, even up until recently, whenever Polyev came out of that trailer door when he was visiting constituents, they had the Diagolon symbol, and the media went bonkers with that. And so I'm just kind of chewing on what Marco was saying about this coming from Ottawa. And there was a whole RCMP thing where they were trying to make it look like Diagolon was trying to take over Canada, and they had this whole mission of insurrection, but it's just an online game essentially.
There's a couple groups they highlighted. Farfada was another one that came out of Quebec. That came out in the POEC. And then other things like Proud Boys and 3%ers, these were all the terms that came up as well. They were searching for some sort of violent extremist group. They didn't find it in Canada, but they were searching.
Diagolon was the greatest guerrilla marketing campaign to ever hit Canadian soil.
It still is.
It's true. Like, if you think about it, Jeremy McKenzie got his own audience to photobomb politicians, journalists, everybody with their flag, and it helped him build a brand. And like, you can't be upset with a guy that's smart enough to use his collective group to bring a brand awareness to something he's trying to build. And now how that gets tied into the extremeness elements, it's because of his language. Like, he uses what they call irony poisoning, right? Irony poisoning is using comedy to seduce your audience. And that's what the RCMP and CSIS are concerned about, are individuals that actually use comedy to draw people in, because if you could create irony around situations, people are more sympathetic to it. But anyways, yeah.
There's a whole episode there, Jason. You and I got to get together a couple more times. There's a lot of topics we can jump into for sure.
Yeah, no, sorry, man. I
No
don't wanna
worries.
get off track.
Yeah, all good.
The RCMP took an urgent and extraordinary step. How significant is it that police get an imminent harm wiretap?
This is authority used when there's a kidnapping or when.
Okay, to be clear, this wiretap was thrown out. This warrant was thrown out. It was held for 72 hours. 24 hours was allowed. The rest was thrown out. So as you're listening to this, keep that in mind. The pre-trial, this warrant was addressed.
There's a terrorist plot. Like, this is very, very rarely used.
The RCMP started listening to the men's calls. They overheard Olienick refer to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as a terrorist.
Well, he is.
Then, in another call, saying,
I agree
we're
with
going to go to war at some point.
Well, this is an update happening here Sunday night. We're all surrounded.
With a flood of intelligence from undercover officers and wiretaps, 2 weeks into the protest, heavily armed tactical units move in.
What are you guys doing? Why do you guys have guns? We don't have guns.
Trudeau's goons.
Put them away. We don't have guns. Put those away. Put them away, sir.
Chris Lysak was live streaming outside Smuggler's Saloon. Police allege he threatened an officer. He was placed under arrest.
Pretty heavily armed, militarized police. And behind me, there's a whole bunch of family, women, and kids. Yeah, it's just unbelievable why they would do this.
Tony Olienick was also outside the saloon filming.
What is that? Look at this. Tear gas, AR-15.
Police arrested him, too.
Oscar Charlie 2, did the deploy snipers. Hey, hold guys. Snipers are going first. They have a 30-second head start.
RV Alpha appears to have somebody inside of it, and is the highest concern for us right now.
Betty, I got to ask you, RV Alpha would be possibly Chris's RV, and they're talking about snipers going 30 seconds in before. Is this, you've heard this before. What were your thoughts when you're hearing that?
I don't know. I found it all unbelievable. Snipers going in there. I don't even know what to think, because just knowing what I know that snipers didn't need to be there. So, and it was all peaceful, and as it turned out, very uneventful arrests.
Correct. And Chris was sleeping with COVID at this time.
Yes.
That came out in the
Yeah.
trial. And the judge at the end commended the police officer's restraint during this arrest. That could have been a lot more dangerous for Chris. He was pretty clear about that during some of his statements, the judge.
The court granted the Fifth Estate access
Sorry, Betty?
No, just go ahead.
Okay.
to these recordings. For the first time, we can show you what happened as police raided a series of trailers blocks away from smugglers.
Occupants of the trailer, this is the police. Come on with your hands up and hands empty. Do it now.
Police find Chris Carbert inside one of the trailers.
Did he resist or did he surrender to you? He was arrested without incident.
Says he's lone occupant. Said the people staying with him are in custody as well.
Did you get an identity on him?
That's our T1, Chris.
Still at large, Jerry Morin. Police intercept him on the highway, allegedly on his way back to Coutts with firearms.
One of those is a 22 that during the trial we learned was seized because there was a jam inside of it. So the 22 was inoperable. And this is one of the things I posted recently. The police actually cleared the jam and then entered it as a functioning firearm in the trial. So one of those is a 22 that was not even functioning. That had a jam in the barrel that we heard.
But they also said for the first time, we can show you footage of the raid inside the trailers. They didn't even go inside the trailers. They cut that clip and then they went to Chris Carbert being arrested. And so nobody got to see the weapons, what they were yanking out, like the seizures, the search warrants, nothing. And I'm not trying to create conspiracy, but they kind of build this emotional narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just not true. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot more behind that too.
Hardly the arrest of somebody who's planning a shootout with the RCMP, no?
Yeah.
Well, keep in mind, he even knew the other guys were arrested hours before, and he stayed asleep.
Well, an hour, hour and a half, give or take, right? We went from just after
Well, it's
midnight
9:30
to
for Lysick, and then it was an hour later or so.
Tony.
Yeah,
so
and then
a couple
had
hours
that.
later.
But he was
they moved
aware.
in.
But we've had
He was
text
aware,
messages.
and
He was
correct.
aware.
He was aware. But even Chris and Tony, I mean, just this is a question for the audience and a question for the panelists. But if you are actually conspiring, you've stockpiled weapons and ammunition to have a shootout, would you, when tactical comes barreling in sideways, because that's what they did, when tactical came in at 8:30, 8 o'clock that evening, wouldn't you have a guilty conscience in relation to all these guys? They're on to us. Would you stick around filming, engaging with the RCMP, getting as close to getting as close as Lysak did to comment on, the firearm that this officer was holding? And when I say comment, how he didn't want to take it. He just liked the firearm. Like that goes against every. I mean, unless you're like some phenomenal actor or you are some. I don't know. Unless you.
Okay, now you're saying Chris was arrested. Chris Carbert was arrested an hour and Okay, but Chris Carbert was arrested an hour and a half after the other two were arrested.
Mm-hmm. Correct. 12:30 on the 14th.
2 to 3 hours.
So to build off of what you just said, if you were conspiring to kill police officers, and I just found out my buddies, that I was coordinating with, I would have put all the weapons inside the vehicle, inside a truck, and I would have been hightailing it out of there.
I would have been like Bonnie and Clyde. I would have been in the next state. I would have been in the next province already. Like I would have been gone, man. Like I would have been I would have been like a coyote, because it's all prairie, like it's all farm. Like that was so tough for the RCMP is they put blockades up, but we could take the ditch, we could take the field unless there was too much snow. But if I was planning this, and my best friend, Chris Lysak, is Chris Carbert's best friend, and Tony Olienick, he's now known him for some time. But if those two individuals, who are the two that are on site, Jerry was not on site, but if your whole team, your whole little group, if you're the only one left of this big conspiracy, wouldn't you take the evidence and get the heck out of Dodge?
Of course. Of course.
And this is what the police
didn't do that. Saying. He went to sleep. He went to sleep.
In fact, there was a text message from Carbert calling Lysick silly for even making a comment like that. So this wasn't some sort of militia that they were ready to fight. He was actually, there's a text message where he was not friendly towards Lysick for making a silly comment.
Did the lawyers try to argue this on Chris Carbert's behalf in the courtroom?
Which part?
Well, just like it wouldn't make sense if there was.
They did.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And the biggest argument there, sorry, babe, 1 sec. The biggest argument there, Jason, is they kept saying, here's what would have happened if we moved in. Here's what would have happened if we moved in. But they did move in. We don't even have to speculate or do hypothetical. They did move in, and we saw the actual result, and it was nonviolent, and it was just to surrender. So they keep painting this picture. When the police are going to move in, they're going to be shot at. But they did move in, and they were not shot at. We don't have to play the hypothetical game anymore. The reality actually happened. This is where I'm stuck, and this is why Betty, I think, can be frustrated, is because we heard so many times in that trial what could have happened if we didn't move in. But you did move in, and none of that happened.
Yeah. And if these guys had planned this shootout with the police, they obviously would have known that they weren't going to get out of it alive. So if they were prepared to die, why wouldn't have Chris come out of his trailer firing at everybody? Because he was ready to die anyhow.
Correct. It doesn't match. The narrative doesn't match the reality. We're getting some background. Who's that from?
Go fuck off. Call yourself
Who's
a fucking gangster.
Who is that? Marco's side. Okay, we got you. something coming from your side there, Marco. All right, Jason, we'll continue now, but I really harp on this one. There's a lot of hypotheticals of what could happen, but we have the reality.
Yeah, this is going to take us 6 hours if I keep interrupting.
No, here's what I'm going to do if you guys don't mind. We'll probably get about the halfway point, and then maybe we'll continue tomorrow. But we're certainly doing a great job here, and I don't want to kind of stop.
Arms in his truck. Tony Olienick, Chris Carbert, Chris Lysak, and Jerry Morin, all under arrest and without a shot fired, all charged with conspiracy to murder police officers.
It took to the point where we knew what was about to happen or inevitably to happen, and we acted as soon as we could.
When the RCMP did make me aware that there was possibly individuals that had ulterior motives, that was very concerning to me. We were there peacefully. I had addressed the protesters at one point and said, if you have any paraphernalia in your trucks, and I didn't even specifically mention guns, this is, get it off the highway. This is not why we're here.
The dangerous criminal activity occurring away from the TV cameras and social media posts was real and organized.
The federal government would tell the public what happened at Coutts was serious enough to help justify invoking the Emergencies Act for the first time. The police now had
Notice how they
unprecedented
didn't show
power
the woman getting trampled by the horse?
Candace.
Forcefully shut down the protests.
We're talking about a group that is organized, agile, knowledgeable, and driven by an extremist ideology where might makes right.
None of that was proven in court. Yeah, none of that was proven in court.
None of it even entered the court.
Wasn't going to be easy. Coming up, the RCMP interrogate the accused.
It's not what you guys think of it being this militia group or some terrorist organization. That's what the government and the media is going to spin it as, like they have.
Prophetic.
He was right. He was right. It's a great point for a commercial.
On that cold February night, the RCMP took 14 people into custody. But at the detachment in southern Alberta, their focus was on 4 men who the RCMP believed were plotting to kill their fellow officers.
I just want to see my mom and my cat.
These investigators?
They didn't even say alleged there. They said plotting to kill.
Yeah. They know what
That's
they're
a
doing.
direct statement. That's libel.
I hope there's some lawyers paying attention.
These investigators that are involved in these interviews do not understand. This is a conversation I've had with them. Do not understand how the courts have been able to build the situation that they have, and that these men have been held. This is a conversation I've had months ago, pre-trial this long, and possibly even convicted.
So you're saying that some officers spoke to you and they don't believe that this is the right thing to be going on? Is that what
They
you
don't
said
understand. They don't understand the narrative that prosecution serves. Because like these officers, they're just pieces of a puzzle, right? They're here to question, record, and then that information gets shuffled to, whoever builds the case. And the Crown then gets that information and puts it together. But I mean, I don't think the investigators themselves ever work with Crown prosecutors. There's obviously people that are involved in between. But something else that's important to note here is that they've arrested 14 people. You want to know how big? Does the public, does the panelists and the audience want to know how big this cachet? And I mean, this is Trudeau's Canada, so I mean, I understand when you want to ban guns as a whole, every legitimate firearm is considered dangerous. But you want to know how many guns were actually, 14 people were arrested. You know how many guns they actually found?
In the photograph, 15.
14 guns. And maybe I'm wrong with the 15, but what I know is 14 guns. It's 14 guns.
For multiple properties.
Sorry, 12 guns, and we have to check the photograph, Jason, but I believe the information I received was 12 guns for 14 people.
So does that mean that Tony Olienick, who was going to have a shootout with the police, left his 36,000 rounds of ammunition at home?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, 200 kilometers away from the protest.
Yep.
Correct.
What Tony specifically had was a shotgun with no shotgun shells in the trailer. So the shotgun shell was not on the ammo inventory at that search. They found some at his home, but not there. And the rimfire 22. That's what Tony had.
Yeah, and it's not like the
lever action too. By the way, lever action 22 for Tony.
It's not like the infamous gun picture either, that all of those guns were taken from a single location. They were taken from multiple properties, at least 3 that we know of. And I don't think anyone has ever been able to establish a firm chain of custody for all of the guns. I don't think anybody knows who owns each of the guns. And the RCMP never even tried to.
The guns have been accounted for, even with the other proceedings that have received.
But not in the court system. Like the RCMP has never done it publicly. It didn't come up in court. And
no, that's correct. That's correct.
Not yet, Alex, but there's one more trial to come. So there's another trial of some more people to
which
come.
Involves the majority of the firearms.
Correct.
The majority of the firearms were not in RB Alpha.
Correct.
Nope.
6.
Nope.
6 total in RB Alpha.
Very important detail the RCMP fails to clarify, and the courts fail to clarify, and the CBC fails to clarify. It just looks good because, cachet sounds ominous.
Absolutely.
And take the Canada they're presenting this to. Take the audience, where I would probably guess 90% of the audience doesn't own a firearm, has never shot a firearm. It's a dangerous thing. It kills people. Firearms kill people. So it's wrong.
But much like Diagolon as well, the infamous gun picture never entered court, and it was never a part of the trial. So Diagolon and this gun picture are the 2 biggest things, the 2 most prominent things in the public imagination surrounding this case, and they never came up in the courtroom at all.
Well, because legal guns in the vicinity of a protest is not a crime. You understand? Legal guns owned by law-abiding citizens legally. The only thing that has come out of the guns is the improper storage of a restricted firearm, which Chris Lysak pled guilty to.
And the possession
That's the only
prohibited.
Offense. Correct, yes.
And possession prohibited when you had a probation. Yeah.
But that picture, which was used conveniently at pretty much the same time that Marco Mendocino with Trudeau and all of them got in front of the microphone and implemented the Emergencies Act. That picture stoked fear. That was the sole purpose of that. It's burned into the minds of Canadians. Mm-hmm. But that picture itself, like Zoltan just said, has never entered the courts because there's nothing illegal about. There's nothing that, without actually inspecting the clips and all of that stuff, which we know there may have been some minor alterations, which, illegal or not, everybody does, especially in rural Canada. But there's nothing illegal in and of itself in relation to that picture without further investigation.
Okay, so let's clear up now. Why were there so many guns there? Was it a situation where these people didn't want to leave their weapons in their vehicles and they just stored them at the trailer for safe storage? And it just so happened that Chris Carbert was sleeping there. And is it this situation where guys just didn't feel comfortable leaving their weapons, because there's lots of people in Alberta that carry weapons.
Yeah.
So what's the story behind that?
Betty, you could probably confirm this.
Yeah. One of the RCMP actually testified that this was Southern Alberta and almost every farmer and every small town person has a gun in the back of their truck. So for it to be unusual, it's not unusual. And,
okay. Here I'm going to say something that, and I could give a shit what people think, because I've said this from the beginning. It's not a crime, what I'm about to say, what these men did. But this is the biggest mistake these men made. It's been dealt with. We're long past this, but because we're working our way through this was the stupidest thing these men did.
Hindsight's 2022 though.
Hindsight,
Mark.
2022.
No, like I
Or
said,
2020, yeah. Sorry.
It was no, but I'm sorry. Okay, let me be very clear here. Regardless, pre-Coutts or not, bringing guns to a protest is not advised. Hindsight 2020 or not, I will never condone that behavior. I'm sorry, Betty. I'm sorry. I will not. I refuse to. These men have suffered a lot for that mistake, way more than anybody ever will in this country. It is completely unacceptable, but I also cannot condone bringing firearms to a protest or in the vicinity.
I agree, Marco. And if you ask those guys, they would agree now too. But
exactly.
But what they're bringing in was not for the intent that
No,
they're trying to be accused of. But yes, do they regret it? Of course they do. Yeah.
I'm trying to be unbiased here. I don't want to be as biased on this side as the RCMP or as the CBC is on that side, because some people say, well, my biggest question that I've received from media, from all the interviews I've done is, well, why were the guns there? I can't speak to that. All I can say is that was a mistake. These men realized that was a mistake. That's it. I can't put myself into the minds
Marco,
of men.
there were a lot of other people there that also admitted that they're glad it wasn't them because they had a gun too. So they weren't the only ones, but yes, it was stupid. Yes.
But I want to be fair to everybody. I think the only real big mistake here, Marco, and I think you'll agree with this, is everybody underestimated what the government was willing to do to citizens. Full stop.
And correct.
And I think if all four of the men, if they thought at any time in the future that something like this would happen, they would have left their stuff at home.
Are you
if I could just interject here for
yeah, go ahead.
Alex, yeah, go ahead.
So I completely agree with Marco. I think we can all agree that you should never bring a firearm to a protest. That's just not a good idea. But we need to do a little bit of myth busting here. They didn't have the guns at the protest site. They had them very close to the protest site. But at no time is there any evidence that anybody had a gun at the protest. That seems to be something that's picked up legs and started to walk on its own, but it's simply just not true. Nobody had a gun physically at the protest site.
Correct.
Vis-a-vis Smuggler's Saloon or even close to that area. Betty, you can
in relation to the courts.
I
can add to this because even my brother was making his way to Coutts.
Right.
Not as the initial convoy, but later that Saturday when it became quite viral as to the size and the scope and it was all locked down. And my dad phoned him and says, hey, you got that gun in your truck. He turned around from Lethbridge, went and brought the gun home because like Betty said, people have guns in their trucks. But I also know that these trailers were not parked. They were not. They were relocated multiple times.
I went to the site relative to the Smuggler's Saloon. You're right. It's not particularly far, but it's not particularly close.
No. That was not their initial location. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Those trailers were not located at Joanne's from the get-go. Everything, once the RCMP actually delivered that final ultimatum, and when they actually started to investigate the protest, we're already 4 days into the protest. Pieces had been moving all along. The reality remains is that people went to this slow roll, to this protest, assuming they would be home at the latest the next day, which means you take your guns with you, which means there's no, the details of the Coutts blockade couldn't even be dreamed of at that point. I remember saying to my wife, Elizabeth, says, hon, I might not be home tonight. I don't know. I mean, traffic, who knows? I mean, I might get arrested. I mean, we were pissed off, kind of like these environmentalists. They block a logging road. They get hauled out of there 5 hours later. 18 days? That was never a plan. So having guns at a protest, that was not even the plan. I mean, the guns somehow showed up at a slow roll in a vehicle in a legal manner. But regardless, not the best decision.
No,
That's
not
all I'm
advisable.
saying.
not advisable, and I completely agree with you there. But I think it's important just for the sake of the audience.
Absolutely.
And also, I think it's also important contextually. And Betty, you can confirm this. I recall you saying that Tony and Carbert, I believe your son had an intention to go hunting, but he got sick.
Lysick and Carbert did, yes.
Oh, I thought it was.
Yeah, that's it. So, like, Chris didn't have his guns there originally. He went home for them because the Hutterites around their head said that they would give $40 for every coyote they shot. But as it turns out, Chris went and got his guns, but was never able to go out because he got COVID and was in bed for the rest of the protest.
That's right. I seem to recall maybe you and I had a conversation in the hallway in the courthouse, and you had said if he hadn't gotten sick and he had gone hunting that day, they would have had kind of plausible deniability for why the guns were there.
Right.
Jen, are you going to jump in there?
Well, we got to get through this video, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry, okay. We're getting there.
Officers needed the men to open up, so they had to gain their trust. Before the interview began, an investigator explained his technique for the recording.
But just because I say something in this room about my views does not necessarily mean that those are my views. And definitely does not mean that they're the views of the RCMP or represent the RCMP.
Bottom line, we have a right to protest peacefully, right?
Yeah, and that's what we're doing.
I don't think we're the fringe minority, that's for sure. You look at the support across the country, it's pretty amazing.
I certainly don't think that you're wrong with that.
Jason, one second, hold on. Did you hear the statement of that officer? My views of the RCMP.
Mm-hmm.
He's acknowledging that he lies.
Yep.
Right. So this, the judge takes the RCMP's testimony, their position, other than mistakes, as the facts and the truth, and that they don't lie. This officer contradicts the judge's statement by saying, we will use whatever techniques and whatever we need, language we need to use to essentially make you say what we want you to say.
Yeah, and Jason, this is the particular video you should go through. I did post this, and it's out there. There's a time, and I also posted clips, because there's a time where this officer says there is a wire, and there's a transcript when he's referring to the undercover operative's statements. So this is something that needs to be dissected. And Marco, you're correct. At the beginning of this, he gives a disclaimer that basically says, I'm going to lie through my teeth. I'm going to buddy up to this guy. I'm going to make him comfortable so he can spill the beans. That's basically the disclaimer at the beginning. And the judge did acknowledge a couple of times, Marco, during the trial, that they are professional liars, and he was actually impressed with how good they are at that. But he didn't use that as being dishonest when it came to their testimony on the stand. He said that their testimony on the stand was completely factually correct, and there was no errors with it. But he understood that professionally they do have to lie. That did come up. All right.
Class, Andy, and you are in the middle class. I am in the middle class. Everybody in this room, building, everywhere is the middle class. And when the elites win, we all lose, and we'll all be in a concentration camp then, just like it was in Germany.
The Fifth Estate obtained more than 13 hours of footage. It has never been broadcast before, and shows the police interrogating Tony Olienick, Chris Carbert, and Chris Lysak.
Yeah, I just want to be with my son. I know. I love him so much.
I just want to be left alone to raise my kids.
Yeah.
The men were denied bail, and each court appearance became a rally of support as police looked on.
I don't believe that we are the fringe minority. I think that the rest of them are the fringe minority.
Many insisted the men were wrongfully accused, heroes, even political prisoners.
If your child was in jail for a year and a half, having been convicted of nothing, how would you feel about it?
This was not just a small band of ragtag criminals.
Temetope Oriola.
Wow. I called them criminals there.
This guy, I can't watch this. This guy's.
It's disgusting. I mean, it wasn't a group at all.
Everything he just said was a lie. I hope somebody sues him.
Yeah, Matumbo really pisses me off here.
But it almost seems like he's kook bait. Like they put, because stylistically, I've made a few documentaries of my own. They present him as like the supervillain, the antagonist of this entire thing, and it is working. And I feel like that is almost the intention here. This is not an informational documentary. I don't know what this is. I described it earlier as a hallucinogenic fever dream. Like this is
I was on the fence in relation to deportation, but I'm on board now. I'm sorry.
See, that's the things that they want you to say. You don't want to say stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
No,
and Jen's paying attention.
But it's disgusting. It's unacceptable behavior and unacceptable language. And I mean, take the joke in stride, guys. It was a joke.
No, I know. It's
yeah, I know. But I am going to be listening, so I'm going to just pop away for a quick bio break. I'll keep playing, but I'll be right back, folks.
Is a criminologist at the University of Alberta. He has watched as some people rejected the police version of events.
There was this intrinsic belief that, well, it cannot be that dangerous. They cannot pose much of a threat because they are us. They are a mirror image of mainstream society.
And in the years since the men's incarceration, Oriola has kept tabs on the expanding support networks across Alberta.
They had underlying sentiments and positionalities that were far-flung from what the average protester there might have felt. Yes, there were folks in society who didn't like the vaccination mandate, who had anti-government beliefs and all of that. But I think the average member of the public would draw a line once you start gathering firearms to take on the police.
At Smuggler's Saloon, protesters hung a Canadian flag. The men signed their names, along with others at the blockade.
It's kind of like kissing the Blarney Stone, I guess. You're there, you got to sign the flag. I didn't.
Even months later, owner Roger Vilcarsis questioned the arrests. So from your perspective, the arrests were not because of a public safety threat. They were because of what?
Political. They wanted to shut this down. Somebody wants you locked up or trumped up charged, they can do it.
The RCMP released very little information in the aftermath of the arrest, but they did publicize this photo and said it showed what they pulled from the trailers and a home they raided in Coutts. 13 long guns, handguns, tactical gear, ammunition, and more.
All right, so there's our count. There's 15 firearms in there, so 13 long guns and 2 handguns. But yes, there was 14 arrests, so 1.05 guns per person, something along those lines.
I mean, this photo has been...
Sorry, Alex?
This photo has been hyper-analyzed to death, but there's some really weird things. And he actually does mention it in the documentary in just a few seconds here, that they included a machete in the picture. And walkie-talkies and body vests that you might use to go hunting. And so it very much seems like they went to at least 3, maybe 4 properties, and they just found anything that looked vaguely threatening. Like, I'm surprised they didn't pull out the kitchen knives and like throw those on the table too while they were at it. Like, this stuff isn't relevant, and there's no chain of custody for who these weapons belong to. And it didn't, again, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but it did not enter the courtroom as evidence. So why is it in this documentary?
What did enter the courtroom as evidence is pictographs or pictures of duct tape. Just to be clear, duct tape was put to the jury.
And a video of them raiding one of the trailers and then eating pizza.
The truth is that this absolutely took place, and I'm not going to argue with somebody who isn't going to listen to the facts.
But that wasn't enough to convince some supporters.
Okay, so one thing I've noticed with this Trudeau narrative, they always use reinforcing words like absolutely, and then they end it with the facts all the time. It almost seems scripted.
I agree with that statement. And we saw that in the Crown as well. There were certain words that they kept using, like violent extremist and radicalization. Those words came up a lot as well during the trial.
Well, and if you're interested in the facts, wouldn't a good journalist be asking questions like, who owns these guns? Are they owned legally? Where were they found? I mean, are these not important facts?
Yeah, I think so,
Yeah, what a statement to make at a press conference. No questions, just listen. They're all facts. Interesting.
Yeah.
Vilcarsis believed police faked the bust.
She watched, so this is first-hand news, them plant guns.
She says that they planted guns?
She watched it.
Yeah.
Okay, so this part I'm going to be standing up for because Joanne was on my show and I addressed this with her. She did not say that guns were planted. She says this in her own words. She said that they brought them into her home and collected them. It was a speech that she gave that the internet, that this gentleman is obviously listening to, that made this narrative. Hold on a sec. Yeah, Marco, we're getting some audio on your side. And then she clarified that they collected the firearms into her home. She never said that. So what they're doing here, folks, that's watching, is they're actually creating a conspiracy theory that doesn't exist and using it against everybody. Unfortunately, this gentleman didn't watch my episode with Joanne where she explained all
actually,
this.
if you, and I won't, I know that we're moving at a snail's pace here, so I won't ask you to rewind or anything, but they said a few months after the arrest, people believed this. And this is my third
she
watch
gave a
through.
speech.
So that's how I picked up on that. But I mean, why bother revising the documentary now? We're only 3 years removed.
Well, as Marco pointed out, they may have done all of this before my show and before my interview with Joanne, so they may not have went back and corrected it. But she was specific on this particular issue. She never said planted.
I mean, they only had 3 years to correct it, right, Jason?
Yeah. We got some work ahead of us, right, Alex? All right, here we go.
The woman he's talking about is named Joanne Person. Olienick, Lysak, and Carbert were staying in a trailer on her property. Carbert was arrested there, and that's where police seized many of the guns.
Hi, Joanne. Hi, I'm Steven. I'm with
Not
the
interested.
Fifth
Media's already told enough lies about me. I don't need any more garbage out there about me.
You know, we're hoping to hear your side because we know a lot of folks in town say that this was set up by the RCMP, and we know you were here, that you could tell us perhaps what happened.
Not interested, thanks.
Well, I feel privileged. I've been inside that home. She did invite us in, and we had lots of conversations. So she will speak to media, just not this one.
She's responded to my emails as well.
She's a great woman.
Yeah, she's nice. I like this person. Sweet lady.
Inside the interview room, the men continued to insist they were run-of-the-mill protesters.
What about Chris Carbert?
Good dad, single dad, custody of the son.
Not a dangerous guy.
That I know. He's great. He's been a really good friend.
Mm-hmm. And Jerry?
He's really good.
Yeah. Same day as Guns, God's Freedom, like...
Well, I met Big Chris at the gun shop.
Where do you guys usually shoot?
Oh, we have a couple places.
One of those places was this gun shop in Lethbridge. The owner declined to speak to us, but sent us to another store nearby. It's owned by Ted Feller.
I've known the one Chris for many, many, many years when he was just actually a youngster growing up. In fact, I did take him out hunting at one time.
A picture of a young Chris Lysak hangs on Feller's wall. He says he didn't believe the charges when he first heard them.
Bought his licenses, bought his ammunition, and never, ever bought anything out of the ordinary that I thought, what the hell is he up to? Mm-hmm. The other firearm that I did see in there is what we would call an SKS.
He heard the rumor that the RCMP planted guns and says he disputed it.
And I looked at the photoreal gun, I go, oh, I recognize that, Might even have sold him that firearm.
Okay, so we did the same thing. We did the same thing. We went through and we know which is which.
We know that they didn't plant the guns. We've known that for the better part of 2 years now. What we also know is that the guns did not belong to these 4 men who were charged with so-called conspiracy to commit murder, at least not exclusively. So why is that not important enough for them to mention? Like, why is this? It's crazy making.
It seems like they went to the arms seller who was going to. Sure, he knew Chris growing up, but then he says, well, who knows? They could have been bought here. They could have been those guns. And it just makes me wonder when they went to the gun shop first that the owner wouldn't talk to them. You just have to wonder how the CBC went about selecting who they were going to interview and the way they present themselves by mainstream media. So someone comes, answers the door, and it's the CBC wanting to ask questions about something controversial like this. And if you know that the CBC is going to skew it some way, you're not going to want to have that interview. So I think that that's also how a documentary like this comes to be so one-sided, is that they get the people that are willing to talk and are willing to leave that little bit of trace of mystery. Like, well, it could have been from this gun shop now that I have a look.
No, fair enough. And one detail.
Why weren't you smart like Miss Person? Just slam the door on them.
Yeah.
No, fair. But I also want to highlight here,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to pick on you. I'm laughing with you. I'm not laughing at you, I promise.
No worries. One detail I think is important at this stage, Chris Carbert and Chris Lysick's properties, business and residence, were not searched, and both of them actually had more firearms. If they had searched and had brought those firearms forward, it would have shown how they did not bring an arsenal down to Coutts. They brought the smallest caliber firearms for hunting because that's what they said they were going to do with that. But there was no search of Lysick's property, business, or residence.
They searched Lysick's house.
Yes, they did.
Did they Lysick's? Okay, so Carbert's they did not search.
No, his house or his business.
Okay, but that's where the gun safes were.
They fully searched Lysick's. Yeah.
Right. I'm just getting to the gun safe. So the gun safe was with Carbert. There was one at home and one at the business, right, Betty?
Yeah, I believe so. In the gun safe, yes.
Right. So that never made it into the trial. There was never a search. And what I'm just trying to highlight here is if there was some sort of plan to stockpile in Coutts, they left all the larger caliber stuff back in Lethbridge, locked up in a gun safe.
And I know that I'm being semantic here, but in a sense, if planting guns is to take a whole bunch of random guns and put them in one location and take a picture and create the impression that those guns had been together all along, then they did plant guns. I mean, they didn't plant them at the location of Miss Person's property, but they planted them for the purposes of the photo op, certainly. And I know I'm being semantic there, but...
No, but I'm going to be semantic back. Staging is the proper term for what you're saying there. Staging. And that
Fair
is...
enough.
It is.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But the line between staging and planted is very blurred.
That's fair, but even the officer admitted on the stand that they staged that photograph for the purpose of the media. The officer who staged that photograph used that term on the stand. That's why I'm going back to that term.
Now, was the Diagolon staged or planted?
He used staging because they staged the photographs for the media.
No, you never heard my question.
Were
the Diagolon patches staged or planted?
Right, and planting and staging is almost a distinction without a difference, really, when you think about it.
I would have a difference. But Marco, I didn't hear your question a couple times.
Sorry, my question is a detail of the photograph. Were the Diagolon patches staged or planted?
So we have new information. Chris Lysick says the patches were not on to being seized. According to Lysick, this is recent. According to him, the Diagolon placed onto his vest. He didn't put them on there.
See, and this is, I know for a fact, Jacqueline Martin was pushing the blame onto Lysick in a space, saying that they weren't staged. Like Chris put those on his vest.
He says otherwise.
How would she know?
Well, that's just what I heard in a space between her and Natasha Montreal, and when all that fundraising drama was going on, I asked a few questions.
Yeah, this question got asked. Yeah, fair enough. Now, this question got asked recently on another podcast, not one that included them. And Chris was in the chat, and he confirmed he did not put it on there. And another thing that Lysick has confirmed is he did not leave his firearm loaded, even though they say they found it loaded. We can get into that another time, but he actually has basically proof that he didn't. So there's some things that certainly goes to staging, maybe even tampering with evidence, and possibly closer to Alex's definition of planting. If firearms that were not armed are now armed, and even firearms that were incapable of shooting were cleared and then capable of shooting. So we've seen some of that.
Yeah, well, if you're loading a bullet into the chamber of a firearm, that's planting.
Yeah, or even
that's not but that's not evidence before us. That's a statement by Chris, and I wish he was here to back up his statement. But yes,
if you own one gun, and then I go to your property and I take a picture of that gun sitting next to 8 other guns, or in this case, 12 or 13 or 14 other guns, really is irrelevant at this point, that aren't your gun, you would sort of feel as though your gun was planted next to a whole bunch of other guns that have nothing to do with you. And that's kind of what happened here. I mean, individual gun owners.
Well, I'm using the word staging because another example of what you're talking about is we took the guns, took some ammo, took a sticker that said fringe minority, threw it all together, and then took a picture of it as if that's how they found it, which is not how they found it.
I guess why I'm hung up on this point is at the very beginning of the documentary, they say, oh, well, we couldn't have released any of this information because we didn't want to hurt the men's opportunity to get a fair trial. But this infamous guns picture, this infamous guns picture was posted the day of the arrest, February 14th, 2022. By who? The CBC. So they immediately would have tainted any jury pool because these men didn't get a trial for 2.5 years. By the time they got a trial, there was nobody in Southern Alberta that hadn't seen the infamous guns picture. So I just find it very disingenuous and gaslighting that they say that they were so concerned about hurting these men's opportunity to get a fair trial.
100% correct. 100% correct.
Arms of all kinds, and body armors and so machetes. Those are not typical items that any lawful or peaceful protester would take to the site of a protest.
Did you have any guns?
Again, that is slanderous. That's libel. He's claiming it never happened. It wasn't at the site of the protest.
Well, I can't say that it never happened, but it was never proven in court.
Okay.
Fair. Both of those statements are fair.
Okay. And where was that?
In the trailer.
So you didn't have a gun on you?
No.
You arrested?
Nothing.
So you just literally had a gun there.
At the trailer. In my home, where I was staying. So, to defend myself.
Chris Carbert owned the trailer where some of the guns were seized.
2 mags with 223 rounds, 1 long mag with 223 body armor, 2 mags from armor, loose ammo from a backpack, another rifle.
So yeah, like I can guarantee you this is all wasn't in my trailer. There's no way.
Are there any guns listed here that are yours? Is there anything in here that's yours? No? You're shaking your head, so does that mean no? Or?
Yes, right there. I'm not asking.
Okay, all right.
At that time, Carbert was banned from owning firearms due to a past run-in with the law.
I just want to say something.
Not true.
False.
Not that false. I know.
That's 100% false. Yeah, that's 100% false.
Yes.
But I want to say something first. I want to say something in relation to the interviews as a whole. If you are ever arrested, if you ever find yourself into a situation like this, keep your peace. Just don't talk. I mean, the amount of time focused on these 13 hours of interviews, it's too much. I mean, ask for your lawyer. And I mean, we were all informed that Williamson and Law was down at the protest, Chad Williamson, Martin Raymond, and they said, if you're arrested, these are the steps you need to follow. Don't talk to the RCMP. So, I mean, all right, so it's 2020, but if you ever find yourself in this situation, I don't give a shit if they try to get you to talk for 4 hours. Don't talk to them. Just literally go put your head in the corner, for shit's sakes. Just turn that chair around and go put your head in the corner. You will thank yourself later. I promise you. You
Guaranteed.
will.
You're correct. Now, I just want to correct that misinformation there for the audience. All the men had valid PALs. Chris Carbert had a restricted PAL, which had a restriction or a prohibition on prohibited and restricted firearms. He was allowed to have non-restricted firearms, and he did. And he legally owned all of them except for one. So when they make the statement here that it was illegal, that's not true. That's completely false.
Chris called me about this Tuesday night because I had some questions. I mean, I had asked Betty, she wasn't quite sure. And I had gone on True North the other night or the other day and spoke about this being a lie, a blatant lie. I mean, the man had his pal. This stems from an incident that was almost 20 years ago where he had a 10-year restriction on certain specifics around owning firearms.
It was 10 years on all, but then it was life on prohibited, right?
I don't believe so. I don't believe he never mentioned that. So
I think it was only a couple years on all guns and a lifetime on restricted.
Correct.
Okay,
So
I could be wrong about the lifetime.
Yeah.
Either way, there is no ban. He is legally allowed to own firearms.
And he didn't have any at that time anyhow.
Mm-hmm. But there was no, Chris never had restricted firearms. So in the setting, in the context, he is legally allowed to own the firearms.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just want to be careful about this one. There was a prohibited one that he didn't know was prohibited at the time, and he learned after the arrest that it was prohibited, and that one is what got him the extra 6 months. So, yeah. So he was in possession of a firearm he wasn't allowed to have, but it was not shown or proven that he was aware that it was one that he shouldn't have. In fact, there's evidence that he wasn't aware because Tony Olienick in his interview also used the wrong model number that Chris thought it was. So Chris actually thought it was a certain model number because Tony even repeated that in his interview, the wrong model number. But then when they actually figured out the right model number, it turned out to be prohibited. And Chris didn't buy it knowing it was prohibited. That much I have spoken about.
So at the end of the day, this is another liable statement by the CBC.
100%. Yeah, that one. And they made the statement about all the men. So definitely 3 of them have a clear defamation case there. And then Chris can certainly argue it because even the judge had to defend Chris in the trial because the Crown kept trying to say he wasn't allowed to have any firearm. Chris's pal was presented to the judge and it said right on there, 10-year ban, which has already been well and truly done. And then a lifetime ban on prohibited and restricted firearm.
I know that no one's going to get anything financially from pursuing this, but if we can get the CBC to remove this documentary from online, because if you're spreading blatant misinformation and disinformation, it goes against everything the government is trying to combat right now.
So I would actually go further. And actually, sorry, Alex, I actually think there's a criminality here. There's been some Canadians charged recently for inciting hate against a protected or identified group just for posting online and memes and stuff like that. What the CBC has done here is they targeted Christian white males of Alberta. So I think what they've done here is actually gone above and beyond.
But they're being targeted based off of their political beliefs, and that's not a protected status in Canadian law. So that's where things get a little tricky. And in terms of, getting the CBC to redact or revise things, I have a little bit of experience with that. I emailed a program called Front Burner with regards to an interview that they did with Bill Graveland on this topic. And it's very much just like the Trudeau government itself. They hum and haw over it. They don't respond for a long time. And then eventually they tell you that they investigated themselves and they did nothing wrong. I don't want to sound cynical, but it was a bit of a time waster for me personally.
I think I would like to push back on that because that Mutombo guy, the black guy, he said that this is Christian extremism. Mm-hmm. He made that blanket statement that this is Christian extremism.
I don't know.
He said.
What's that? Christian
nationalism, he said.
Yeah, so
that's a religious
their expert has pinned them into a group.
Well, and Marco, I think it was you that mentioned in your pre-sentencing report meetings, they kind of asked you about your religion, and I think there was some insinuation that if you had said one thing versus another thing, the outcome would have been better for you, which I always thought did kind of validate the concept that they were targeting Christians.
You did a pre-sentencing report, Marco?
No.
Yeah, no, that's not Marco.
That must have been somebody else then.
Yeah, that would have been Alex and George's because
it would have been.
That's why I got a big X on my back.
Sorry, there's a lot of moving pieces here. I can't get it all.
There certainly is. And that's why we're fact checking real time right here. And Jason and Alex, I actually think hopefully this video that we're doing right now will assist in the demand for CBC to respond. So let's go ahead and continue.
I tagged the host and the producer in your live stream tonight, so let's hope they're listening along.
I sent them an invite too. That we know the same two people because of my accidental.
You were talking about Grant LaFlanche. You're talking about Grant, but he wasn't with them at that time. But Rachel Ward has been the producer all along for the last couple of years. but the host here is Steven, and I tagged both of them. So
fantastic. Thank you. I hope they're watching. Hi, Rachel.
Meanwhile, the RCMP were gearing up to raid Olienick's home. On his property, they would find, built into the hillside, the entrance to a bunker.
Is there anything dangerous at your house?
Okay, the bunker.
Okay, the bunker was thrown out in pre-trial, was not allowed in the trial because it was too defamatory and too, there's a term for it.
Ridiculous. He lives on a gravel quarrying mine. I mean,
correct. But we also learned that it wasn't a bunker, that it was actually a fruit cellar because he doesn't have a basement in his home.
That his father had built 20 years ago or something?
Correct. And that's why it was thrown out, because it's not what the ground was trying to present it to be.
But did you see what they just did? They presented it like it's a bunker in the side of the hill, like he's an Afghan Taliban member. It's just completely ridiculous.
I'm surprised they didn't mention foxholes.
Maybe. Yeah, well, we'll keep going.
No. Any explosive? Anything that could be explosive?
Oh, yeah.
Coming up, the RCMP uncovered the conspiracies fueling these men's fear.
I'm probably too deep down the rabbit hole, but it scares me, right? Just from seeing all these elites doing what they're doing and stuff.
So Betty, I have a question for you. Is Chris I don't want to say antisocial, but is he more of a keep to himself type of guy, pretty mellow? He's not outgoing, that sort of thing?
I think a little bit in between.
He has his core group of friends, but he's not flamboyant and he's not the life of the party and all that kind of stuff.
That's right. That's exactly who Chris is.
So I know from reading the Hategate files, I read them front to back, all 29 documents. And I know that the government pre-convoy was targeting people or individuals who were into survivalist skills that had emergency first aid. They were into hunting, sports shooting, these sorts of things. And this is kind of was there a conspiracy here that they knew who these individuals were before? Knew if they arrested a guy like Marco and tried to pin, conspiracy to commit murder against Marco can talk, right? He knows his rights, he knows how to protect himself. But somebody like Chris or Tony, they're kind of free flowing and easily, they'll just because they didn't think they did anything wrong. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So do you think that at any point that your son was specifically targeted?
Good question.
It's a tough one too.
Yeah, but it is a tough one because I don't know what to say to that.
Profiling, right? Like what Jason's trying to say here is, the government had we've seen it in disclosure. They had a profile on pretty much everybody that attended Coutts.
Exactly
the amount of profiles out there. I mean, they were profiling at our verdict, or sorry, at the Coutts 4 verdict the other day. They were taking Lethbridge LPS was. So the narrative is, as a broad narrative coming from Gold, Silver Command, we got to find a group of individuals who are down the rabbit hole. Well, they wouldn't use that terminology. Who have extreme views.
They use the terminology radicalization a lot.
Yeah, who fit a mold. They've created a mold as to the ideal character, as to the ideal individual, the ideal profile. I'm not saying that they did profile, but if they were profiling, these men would have fit the profile.
Let me remind you something.
I've often wondered why these 4 out of the 14 people who were arrested. Because when you think about how spurious the connections were between these 4, they barely knew each other at all. There was no evidence that they conspired to do anything, even innocuous, let alone anything criminal. So, like, why were the other 9 people allowed to walk away on bail, but not these 4? It's never been made clear to me, and I don't think anyone's ever squared that circle.
That's what I'm saying.
I'll square that one away pretty quickly. It's going to be the text messages and the conversations that he did capture. You could add and change code words, and you can change it and stretch it and turn it into other things, but that's part of it. And something that I found really peculiar, Marco, during your trial.
If I could push back to that a little bit, as you recall, at the very end, the closing arguments of the Crown was that they said there was, I can't remember if it was 5 or 9 alleged unindicted co-conspirators.
3.
So they did actually take this narrative, the idea that this was a large ragtag group of criminals, as our expert just called them. They took that to the very finish line of the trial, even based on no evidence, which was bizarre and confounding. But
no, he said that they weren't a ragtag group; that they were actually a well-organized.
That's right. Which is, and to our journalist friend, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name because I wasn't here at the beginning of the podcast, but I did hear you say, on the one hand, Mendocino said they were very organized, but on the other hand, the RCMP said they weren't organized.
No,
and so there's
the mayor.
The mayor. Yeah. So anyway, there's just this kind of these two narratives that are just mutually incoherent. You know what I mean?
So let me inject one more thing here, Alex. During Marco's trial, Officer Greg Tulloch took the stand, and he said that he saw Tony drive down the highway, and Tony didn't really fit in. He didn't look like the other ones, and Tony got his attention. So I took note of that. Possibly, like, let's just be honest with you.
And there was another Asian fellow, Johnson Chiclo Law, was one of the other 14. I mean, I imagine they would have been 2 of the very few minorities in the whole group.
Sure, but let me finish this point. That was only in Marco's trial. Officer Greg Tulloch took the stand in Tony and Chris's trial as well, and he did not repeat that detail. He did not repeat in front of the jury that we noticed Tony driving his truck. He did not have the same testimony that he had in Marco's trial. And I thought that was peculiar because we're now in Tony's trial, and now's the perfect time to try and tell the jury when you first noticed Tony. However, in Tony's trial, they said they first came across Tony when somebody said Tony was a leader to the undercovers. So that's the first time in Tony's trial that they said they kind of crossed Tony. But in Marco's trial, they said they saw Tony on the highway and he stood out as somebody that didn't belong there. And that was Greg Tulloch. Both trials, different testimony. So I want to highlight that because you have to watch all the trials to see this.
For sure. And I'm just adding layers to Jason's question to Betty, right? So do you think they were targeted? And I personally do. I'm just not sure why.
Well, I think
they probably fit the mold more than most. They had guns on site. They had.
I think it goes back to what Marco said. Is like they profiled these individuals. They know that with a little bit of pressure they can coerce them, right? Because let's be realistic. Like the government has profiles on a lot of people. Like they have everything about you.
Especially after tonight, all of us are.
Well, yeah, like the CSE, like the security, the Canadian security establishment was capturing data and building and collecting profiles during the Harper administration. And the Harper administration then put in legislation to basically make it legal for them to do that. Like you could go back, there was reports on this back in 2011. So it's not unrealistic to think that, and maybe I'm trenching more into conspiratorial, might be getting a little bit out there, but I don't think it's unrealistic to think that the government knows Chris Carber's personality. They know Tony Olienick's personality. They have them broken down into a profile group where they know they could lean Tony. If you're his friend, he's a little bit more free talking. If you scare Chris, he's going to think about his kid, the consequences. Same with Chris Liza.
The one thing they all had in common is they were all jaw flappers. Both lawyers admitted to that. And whatever, we're all guilty of that on occasion. I know I am sometimes. and adrenaline was high, but I think that they had the most evidence perhaps against those 4 guys because they were just the most outspoken at the time, and in front of the right people, which is the wrong people, the undercovers.
Sure.
Now,
Okay.
to go down
Chris,
the road you're going down, Jason, to go down to Jason's road a bit, if they were following anybody ahead of time and were keeping an eye and kind of isolated or figured them out sooner, maybe, and if they did that, it would have been Tony, because Tony opened up his home to have people come and do some learning. They were learning how to use radios and some survival things, and they were certainly preppers. So maybe
it's been
they were
widely
looking around.
speculated
But
too
we
that,
also know they weren't on their radar at the beginning.
well, and
Well,
the
that's
three,
what we know.
and
Sure,
3
but
out of the 4 men were single, and the undercovers were female, and so it's no surprise that they were all the biggest jaw flappers. That's what you do when you're a single guy. You're trying to pick up women, right? So they were being bombastic. They were being, that it is what it is. It's just human psychology. It's very normal.
and it's hard to show with evidence, Jason, but the Crown said we didn't know any of these guys. We would have got a warrant for the undercovers if we knew about them. So it's hard to say. But I do want to put it out there that I do think there's a disconnect between the RCMP and what they knew and what the Crown knew. I do think there's a disconnect there as well.
Okay. And like I said, it's probably going way too conspiratorial, but RCMP, if you're watching, email me and let me know if I'm right. That's all.
So what I'm going to propose to everybody, what I'm going to propose,
there was a huge narrative, if I can, very quickly, Jason, there was a huge narrative on the part of Tony's lawyer that this was a honey trap, and that this was essentially entrapment, and it was a bit of a romantic entrapment, and so.
Well, Donald says there absolutely had to have been.
Yeah, but again, that again is it could be basis off a profile, right? So they specifically
strategy.
They knew that Tony was single. They knew that, he was that again, this falls into the possibility of a profile being built around each individual.
So what I'm going to propose at this stage is we're going to pause the video. I'm more than happy to have you all back again tomorrow, same time, if you want to do that. I'll do it, but you're all welcome back, and we'll continue the other half. And maybe we'll wrap up at this first half at this stage, kind of just banter a bit on what we saw happen here. So, Jen, I want to pull you in here because you did a really good analysis before as well. Are you surprised about some of the details you heard from Marco, Betty, myself, even Alex and Jason as they're following this? Are you surprised at some of the details you've heard?
Oh, for sure. Actually, I've been taking notes as you guys have been speaking because so many things that have not been disclosed before have come up during this conversation. And so really, I've just been listening as each of you in your own ways have filled in those gaps of what this documentary has left out. But also my mind keeps going back to how this was portrayed through the media throughout for these past years. This documentary is so emblematic of the way that this has been portrayed right from the beginning. And so Betty, hearing from you, like as a mother of one of these men, hearing your explanations for how some things transpired and what that looked like from your perspective. And Marco, you were down there too. And Jason, you were in the court, and it sounds like you were too, Alex. So having all of these voices collaborated to patch together what the CBC has left out, I think it's really telling. And I've been shocked at some of the revelations that have come up tonight. And I think that it gives people a lot to think about. Like, why were the police, the RCMP, so afraid down at Coutts? What were they so afraid of? And where was that coming from? It seemed like you talked about information flowing in from Ottawa, rather so much being the other way around. And I think that this case, like what's so compelling about what happened at Coutts is that it demonstrates the complex system that is Ottawa, right? Yeah. And this fits into that map of what has been constructed. And so when we see that officers are coming in feeling afraid and running away from the scene when they hear that guns might be coming, I mean, that doesn't seem like a police force that is really out to have security of people in Canada and to really protect the country, right? So it just makes me wonder, where's that coming from and what's the agenda?
You bring up a really good point, and I highlighted this during the trial, that after hearing some of the officers take the stand, especially Kwan, who was the main senior forensic examiner for the cell phones, I walked away from that being very concerned that we're not safe from the RCMP. And I don't mean like the citizens. I mean, they're incompetent. Like, some of the things I heard was just like, really? You guys did that, or you missed that, or you think it's that? Like, I'm concerned that if there's a genuine threat, are we safe as Canadians? And that's kind of how I walked away from some of that testimony from the RCMP. It's scary to me as just a Canadian. Like, are we really safe? Is this how they do it? They had a pizza during this search. They were walking around with food. They were staging things. They were moving
They
things.
used Miss Person's microwave to heat up their pizza.
Did they really?
There's stuff. Yes, and they admitted to it on the stand. Like, this isn't.
Right.
We're not speculating. They talked about this.
And so it makes me wonder, why the staging? Why were they going on this specific hunt in the protest to go and find guns, to go and find a Diagolon connection, even though
because we weren't leaving, because we weren't going.
Yeah.
They had tried everything to get us to leave. The only thing that was going to get us to leave was this narrative about shooting RCMP officers. The threat of the threat of the Emergencies Act in Coutts would not have been enough to get us to leave. And I'm thankful that it never came down to them attempting to curb stomp farmers and truckers in southern Alberta, because I can guarantee you it would not have looked the same as it would have in Ottawa. No disrespect to Ottawa, but most of those people were away from home. We were within. This is southern Alberta. Like, good luck trying to haul 200 protesters down Highway 4 back to Lethbridge. You would have had every farmer would have been on the road.
Yeah,
it would have been.
I suppose, like, and first of all, I do want to apologize to Marco for poking at you earlier. I think that a good journalist, and more importantly, a good person, will speak to anyone. And I do appreciate that you went on the program, even if they didn't portray you fairly, because now we can talk.
I don't think they really got me bad. I don't think they have anything. Like, there's nothing in this episode that I'm like disgusted by them using me to twist it. I'm just disappointed they didn't actually use more of the interview, because if they had, the narrative would have changed. Well, I challenged them for an hour and a half.
Well, you've
I
answered your
remember
own
this so
question.
clearly.
Did she ever respond to your text message?
No, she actually hasn't. And I mean, we've talked a lot. I mean, I filmed another episode with them 2 months ago in relation to politics in the province, right? Take Back Alberta, Daniel Smith's campaign, you name it. Because the responsibility lies with them to portray the truth. All I can do is challenge them, answer truthfully, answer honestly, and do my part in relation to the truth. Like, I had this conversation with Alex on Twitter. I says, I'll talk to anybody, but in this case, unfortunately, that's what they did. They talked to a lot of people. They probably, to form this 40 minutes, they probably have, I'm going to guess, 50, 60 hours of interviews to work off. But you're gonna be able to create any kind of narrative you want, right? There's going to be something I have said.
This is what I find really disturbing about the documentary, Marco, is that it's a very, as you know, information-dense story. So your time is precious, right? Like, they have to be very, very thoughtful and judicious about how they allocate their time to tell this story. And they haven't spent any. I'm not really sure what the purpose of this documentary is, because it does not give you any. It's like a psyop. It feels like it's meant to
prop up the regime. It's to prop up the political. It's regardless of Justice Mosley's ruling against the Emergencies Act, regardless of the truth that is now very prevalent in mainstream society, regardless of the facts, regardless of the acquittals, regardless of the convictions in the courts. This is a hit piece by Canada's mainstream media, funded by us, the taxpayer, to maintain the narrative of that.
Can I just jump in quickly, folks? Just jump in quickly. Betty, if you want to run and get on with your evening, go for it. We're not going to do any more of the video today, or if you want to have some final statements, because I can tell you might be getting a little bit tired on your end.
I have a grandchild here that is bugging me right now.
No problem. As a host, I've been watching your eyes, and it looks
Yes.
like it's time for you. If you want,
I'm being distracted. So, yep. Okay. Yeah, I will leave then. And thank you to all of you for coming tonight.
Thank you for joining.
Betty.
Pleasure
And we'll
meeting
talk
you.
a little bit later.
Okay.
Say hi to the grandchildren for us.
Okay.
Bye. I'm like a body language expert because I'm a host. So I saw her looking where her attention was somewhere else, and I think she needed to leave.
So I want to throw back a question to one of you guys on this. Do you think if Justice Mosley would have upheld Commissioner Rouleau's decision, that the boys wouldn't have this all would have just went away? Do you think that they needed, because there's an appeal in process right now, right? So do you think that the federal government needs some sort of weight going into this appeal? And like these guys are actually part of the political apparatus. Do you guys think that? Do you think if this would have went another way with Justice Mosley, these guys would have been, this all would have just gone away? Do you guys think that?
I would quickly say no, only because I don't think the jury was aware of Mosley or the decision or any of that stuff that was going down. It never came into the trial, so it was never put in front of them in any way, shape, or form.
But the trial didn't happen until after the decision.
Correct. So,
but I mean,
maybe
the
there's two
Mosley
answers
ruling
here.
is not public. It's not real known. Like a regular Canadian isn't aware of that ruling unless they've listened to this side of alternative media, for example.
Yeah. So this jury didn't think that way. I don't think they thought about Ottawa at all. I don't even think their mind went there. It rarely came up at all. Like this was connected to the convoy. It was really focused a lot on Coutts.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me add to that, Jason. We've tied the strings back to Ottawa. Us critics are the ones putting it out there that this is all the doing of, or this is a requirement based on the situation because of the embarrassment that was happening in Ottawa. They needed something to be able to impose their form of martial law, and Coutts was that catalyst. Coutts gave him the justification, et cetera, et cetera. Enough at that time. That picture was enough. Justice Mosley didn't take that picture into consideration. He took the actual facts into consideration. It was debunked, but I mean, even that will never be able to retract the negative. The positive of Justice Mosley's decision will never be able to undo the negative and the harm and everything else that was caused as a result of the implementation. But how that connection in Coutts, Emergencies Act, Ottawa, etc., there was no discussion about that in the courts ever.
Okay,
in relation
no,
to
that's fair. I know it may seem a little out there. It's just a question I kind of wanted to throw at you guys if you thought there may have been a different outcome.
No, what I'd like to see is Rouleau to sit. I would like to see Commissioner Rouleau take a second look at his decision, because a good chunk of his decision was based on the information being true out of Coutts. Now with the jury verdict, we know that's not the case. So I'd love to see him sit down, but I've contacted a couple people. That'll never happen.
Yeah, but Rouleau compromised himself. Like when you sit there and you listen to our top political leaders lying, and like you can't tell me he's not aware enough to know that, Justin Trudeau's lying from one sentence to the next, or that,
of course he was there for a reason. He was the right guy for the job. They had to have the commission. The commission is mandated when you implement the Emergencies Act. You have to have a commission within so much time. There has to be a report tabled to Parliament, all within a certain amount of time. He was their guy. Do the steps, follow through.
And when he ended his statement with a more reasonable and informed person could come to a different conclusion, that means, were you sleeping the entire time, or you know what I mean?
The criminologist at the end of this video, which we'll get to, he says a different jury would most likely come to a different verdict with the same facts or whatever.
Which is always the case in a jury trial. Jury trials are arbitrary. You're dealing with random people who have no understanding of the law, right? I mean, it's like.
But I want to defend the jury a bit here. I think they came to the right decision with what was put in front of them. I don't necessarily agree with their decision, but what was in front of them, I can see how they got there. I don't think another jury would have come up with a different result.
I don't necessarily either.
I'm going to push back on that because you can't convict somebody on gun crimes or intention to do harm with your firearms if the conspiracy to murder, like what were they going to do? Like, shoot up trailers or
I think to go full circle
it doesn't make sense. Like
I think full circle here, like, sorry to interrupt you, but what I was saying earlier is that the first of all, they were going to be guilty of mischief no matter what.
Well,
mischief is the lowest bar of criminality. So the jury would have been guilty on mischief no matter what for anybody that was there, let alone those guys. The possession of a weapons for a dangerous purpose, which is really the main charge that they were found guilty of, there's no clear intent or demonstration of intent of what that dangerous purpose was. What is the dangerous purpose? Because if they're innocent on conspiracy to commit murder, what were they intending to do exactly? It's not precisely clear. So I have to assume then that what the jury's conclusion is that we think there was some sort of dangerous purpose, and we believe beyond reasonable doubt that there was some kind of dangerous purpose, but they don't know what it is, and they don't really need to, I guess, because it's not their job to rewrite the law, it's their job to enforce
and they don't have to explain it either. They don't have to explain their decision.
Well, they can't.
We know
they're legally bound not to
they
talk
can't.
about it.
But do you still
Exactly.
have is Canadian court similar to the United States where you have reasonable doubt?
Yes, reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, so
but it's not similar, but
so it's similar. So back to what Alex was saying, that even if you thought there was a chance, that doesn't, like, there's reasonable doubt there. You can't convict people.
Right. So Bayek said this not
that
in
has
front
to
of
do
the
with
jury.
the charge, though. That's where the details of the charge really come into the picture here.
So
Right?
Bayek was
That's what matters.
Bayek was the judge, or the criminal lawyer, the
counsel.
defense lawyer for Carbert. And she said that the possession of a weapons for a dangerous purpose and the conspiracy to commit murder charges are really sort of all in one. Because if you don't have the conspiracy to commit murder, what is the dangerous purpose? And I wish she had said that in front of the jury, because I think that would have been the nail in the coffin. I think he would have been innocent, but she said that in her closing arguments, her pre-closing arguments to the judge. That really stuck with me because, and I can see why that would be grounds for an appeal on the side of the defense.
Actually, let's zoom out a little bit, Alex. It was the judge who asked the question to all of the counselors there, so all the lawyers, and the judge said, is it possible that the jury could come back with not guilty conspiracy, but guilty on weapons?
Because
and it was
that vocal either. He agreed with Bayek.
It was Bayek and it was Stephen Johnston who both agreed, no, these are married. They're together. They will likely come back together. And it was actually Marilyn Burns who was the only one that said, no, I can see how they can come back with both. And the judge, I think, kind of was confused, but Marilyn nailed it. Absolutely.
So what's it going to cost these guys to appeal this?
They're already started, and it kind of sounds like Alex has read the appeal because that was basically the grounds for the appeal, which was what is the dangerous purpose? Okay, that's basically one of the grounds.
Cost? Hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands and years and no guarantee.
No, appeals are never guaranteed. But now, here's the thing: we now have the sentencing in the back of our mind when we're talking about the verdict, and the verdict in and of itself isn't necessarily the end of the story. Unfortunately, Justice Lebrenz used everything he technically threw out himself: the wiretaps, the acquittal in relation to the conspiracy to commit murder. He used that in his sentencing for the possession of weapons for a dangerous purpose. And
I think, like, my interpretation of the jury's verdict is that they thought there was a conspiracy to do something bad, and they knew that beyond a reasonable doubt in their minds, but it's not exactly clear what that was.
Well, I think it was a holdout, Alex. I think it was a holdout on the deliberations. I think based on the timeline,
I think it was a split
based on
jury
the Friday night, based on the long weekend,
I
they
agree.
couldn't agree. It was like a compromise, and they were allowed to do that.
Okay, so
they just wanted to go home. Essentially, I agree. Yeah.
My next question. So we talked. I read an article from Gord McGill about the sealed envelope. Okay. What are people speculating that's in that envelope? Is there rumor?
We don't have to speculate.
Yeah, we pretty much know. You can use logical inferences to figure it out.
Okay,
Well,
so
no, it was
did
stated.
Did Johnston interfere or direct the RCMP? Is that
Yes.
true? Okay.
Yes.
So the case should have been thrown out.
So what we can tell you is yes,
Not
but we
relevant,
don't
though.
know what. But we don't know what the direction was. So we don't know what the direction was, but we know he was directed. We know that the judge sealed that envelope and the contents of it only on application by the Crown, and it was to protect the justice system so that if the public learnt the contents of that envelope, they would be upset. The judge sealed that envelope based on that argument.
Okay.
So we know it's bad.
But when it becomes a matter of truth in people's lives, how can a judge make that decision because he's scared it's going to embarrass the courts when they're holding these guys in pretrial? You know,
it's more than the courts. This is more than the court. This is where the political element comes in.
Mm-hmm.
This is where a liberal appointed judge, LeBrenz was appointed in 2019 by previous Justice Minister Jody Raybould Wilson, who is still Trudeau's Justice Minister. This is a judge who is still climbing the grease ladder of the judiciary. This is a judge who, with all his good intentions, you got to understand people, right? Like, everybody wants to do the right thing until they're told. Right? And people will be like, "Oh, Marco, what are you saying?" This is the part where there's no.
With this judge specifically, Marco, though, it's very important to know contextually, historically, that he was the Crown prosecutor in the Mayerthorpe case.
Exactly.
So that totally colored his attitude towards the whole thing too, because he was and he was kind of a failure as a Crown prosecutor in the Mayerthorpe case, where 2 police officers were killed. And so he had a lot of empathy towards the police and maybe a lot of guilt as well. I don't know if he was, but I thought he was a good judge.
He's a Crown prosecutor. He's a Crown prosecutor. Yeah. He has been in the same rooms as these Crown prosecutors. Stephen Johnson was hired in 2014.
But as I recall, you weren't allowed. You weren't allowed in the courtroom for the Coutts 2 trial, and I have to say he was really sympathetic to Tony.
Well, I was allowed. I was allowed up until a certain point.
Right.
Will the Barbary Ferry incident?
Did you also get that impression though, Marco, that like he was very sympathetic to Tony, especially? I was quite shocked by that.
Well, I think I don't know. I actually thought LeBrenz was okay up until trial. The judge that was the pre-trial LeBrenz versus the trial LeBrenz were two
very
different people.
Men. Yep.
Right? Like, that was my impression. And when I say I wasn't in that courtroom, well, I have a lot of people in that courtroom, and I got to hear things, and I was outside that courtroom, and there was times where the sheriff kept the doors open so I could.
You also watched the Levine show every day too, didn't you?
I watched, right? Well, not every day, but I mean, I was on I knew what was going on, and without some of this is third party, obviously, but it was a different LeBrenz. It was a different LeBrenz. Now there's different approaches, different lawyers, different. It was a 2.5 year ordeal.
Do you think because he got to view all the evidence and
he can't view the evidence? The only evidence the judge knows is the evidence that gets presented in the court. He doesn't have.
Yeah, they don't sit down and go through it all first. That's not how a judge works.
No. He doesn't get the disclosure at all. The only information he gets is the transcripts.
But he did get that sealed envelope in pre-trial, didn't he?
Oh yes, there was argument there. Yeah,
absolutely.
He knows what is in there. Yeah.
Okay, so
do you think as the judge, being an officer of the court, being having sworn an oath to the court first, and all of that, do you feel like what do you think happens when
I don't think
LeBrenz?
I don't think it trumps his political alignment in his own skin. I don't think that.
Right.
I think people are naturally, for the most part, they're self-serving. So
self-serving.
if there's a chance that he would have got thrown out, or they would have replaced him, lost his job, been, publicly humiliated. We see this time and time again, people that stand up to the system. There's allegations of this.
They disappear. They just go away.
Yeah, but then once they are proved innocent, it's never filtered in the news. It's, they're just living with this smear on them. And they know what they're up against. So people in those positions, there's no doubt in my mind, they would put themselves first above two prairie kids. Right?
And I want to tack on that one, because the judge that I saw during the verdict, and it was late that Friday night when the verdict came out, I felt that he wanted to let them out at that time if arguments were sufficient at that time. The judge that we saw at the sentencing several weeks later, very different. I was surprised at his sentence based on his reaction at the verdict. I thought he felt that the weapons for dangerous purpose should have been not guilty. But now we saw a sentencing, and he came down so hard that it's hard for me to think that way anymore.
But I guess my feelings on this have evolved over the last few months since that happened, Jason, because somebody had said to me, well, what a waste of time for all the people that thought they were innocent. But you have to remember that the jury did find them guilty on multiple charges. So the judge's job is to uphold the wishes of those jurors too. Right? Like even if he thought they were completely innocent, his job is to validate the juror's verdict.
Right, but what you heard Marco say is he brought in the conspiracy into the sentencing. So he even disregarded that portion of their verdict.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I guess that goes back to my original point, which is that what is the dangerous purpose? Well, I guess they thought that there was some dangerous purpose. They just weren't sure that it was conspiracy to commit murder beyond reasonable doubt. But it was conspiracy to do something nefarious. And if that's not clearly identified and there's no intent of that, then I do see why it's grounds for appeal on the side of the defense.
Yeah, and there's no way... There's no way that anybody can ignore the political element to all of this. There is just no way. The only way you can ignore the political element is if you've watched CBC.
No, I mean, that's been the case before we even got to trial. Their bail judge who donated to the Liberal Party, 42 times or something ridiculous?
Yeah.
So she wasn't.
You got
she wasn't
Justice Kubik and Justice Hardigan. Yeah. Eventually,
Okay.
they're bail judges.
Sorry, so on that note, let's go ahead and wrap up. Okay, so I want to get everybody back to their evening.
Sorry, I can talk
and
about this
all
forever.
of you are welcome to come back again tomorrow. So Alex, if you can talk about this forever, come back tomorrow at 6:00 again. I'll send you another link and we'll do this again, because I do want to finish the rest of this. I think there's a huge value. I think even Jen understands that this might be the new media. We will debunk. We'll do it live, unedited, and we'll have the sources, a mother, one of the men involved, and people who sat through the trial. You didn't see these interviews in the CBC. So I invite you all to come back again tomorrow, 6:00, all the viewers as well, and let's do that. Jen, thank you so much for hanging out. You're a good, attentive person. You're paying attention. So I'd love to see what your notes look like.
Yeah, right.
And if you're like the undercover officers, those notes will change over time. So.
Don't worry, these are true blue, happening as it goes. So
you got it. And Jason, thank you for hanging out with us. Great questions, and I really love the fact that you had less knowledge than we did about it, and that helped pull some of it out. And I think we weaved some of the stuff that even we didn't see. Thanks for your parents on that one. Alex, it's always great to see your mouth. I don't know what your eyes look like, but there you go. Yeah, great to see your mouth again, and thanks for coming, man. And I'll send you another link. And then Marco, everything that you've done from the 29th of January 2022 to now. You've been an amazing man, and thank you very much for hanging out with us and sharing these details and correcting me real time. How wonderful is that? Fact-checking Jay real time. I love it. But thank you for everybody. And Betty, if you're listening with the grandchildren, that's what we do this for. It's for the children. This is why we're all out on Thursday night hanging out here talking to you. So let's get back to that. Jason, Jen, Alex, and Marco, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Jason.
Folks.
Thanks.
You guys, everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Oh, Paula is pushing buttons. Let me push a button. There we go. So here's what we're going to do, folks. As you heard, we got through half of it. So yes, I'm going to reschedule for another one, 6 o'clock. We'll continue. If you ask questions, Paula will copy and paste those so that we have them for tomorrow. So what we'll do is we'll try and get through it a little bit faster because there's a lot going on there. And then we'll try and get to all your questions. So please bring them. And go watch the rest of the video if you're curious at how it goes, so you're ready. But look, we're going to do this again. It took 3 hours to get through half. We're going to do the other 3 hours as well. We need to. As we saw there is some blatant lies. There's liability. There's defamation, slander. And I think it's incredibly dangerous what they've done to these men. Even after the jury verdict, they're still persecuting these men. God bless everybody for being here. Thank you so much. And members, we'll hang out another time, but there's 3 hours for you. Have yourself a great night.